Hey guys, this is Star What If. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Harry discovered ultimate wizarding legacy. Here is short summary. Orphaned and unaware of his true heritage, Harry stumbles upon a legacy that could redefine the wizarding world forever. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Mrs. Weasley entered the quiet kitchen of the Burrow, surprised to find a figure seated at the table. Her wand was instantly at the ready. "Don't move," she commanded. "Mrs. Weasley," came the startled reply. "Harry." With a flick of her wand, the lights illuminated the room, revealing Harry Potter shielding his eyes from the sudden brightness. "Harry, what are you doing up so early?" Mrs. Weasley asked, her tone softening. "Yee, up early where I was," Harry replied with a shrug, his words laced with a rough accent born from years on the streets. Mrs. Weasley offered a warm smile. "Well, dear, you don't have to hear. Try and get some rest." "I can't," Harry muttered, his voice heavy with the burden of a past he rarely spoke of. Mrs. Weasley began preparing breakfast, chatting as she worked. Their conversation revealed fragments of Harry's life, his survival on the streets, his bond with a childhood friend named Tiles, and the resilience he had developed in the face of hardship. The morning continued as the rest of the family awoke. Harry joined the Weasleys on a trip to Diagon Alley, an enchanting world hidden behind the walls of an ordinary pub. The magical street dazzled Harry with its wonder, from enchanted shops to a Quidditch broom on display. Their first stop was Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank. Harry was astonished by the grandeur of the goblin-run establishment and overwhelmed upon seeing the wealth stored in his vault. For a boy who had once scraped by on stolen coins, the sight of gold galleons and silver sickles in abundance was surreal. As the Weasleys helped him gather school supplies, Harry experienced a sense of belonging that had eluded him for years. He watched Ron and the twins marvel at Quidditch gear, endured Ginny's shy glances, and stood shoulder to shoulder with his new friends as they prepared for their shared journey to Hogwarts. When he entered Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, Harry found himself seated near a pale, arrogant boy who immediately identified him as a street orphan. But Harry's husky response, tinged with quiet pride and resilience, hinted at a boy whose past would no longer define his future. From the streets of London to the magical alleys of Wizarding Society, Harry's journey was just beginning, one filled with wonder, friendships, and the promise of a legacy he had yet to fully uncover. Harry's eyes narrowed at the way the blonde boy said streets, like anyone who had lived there, was automatically gutter trash. He had met plenty of people who were much more interesting than the boy beside him. "Yay, what's it to ye?" growled Harry. "Nothing," replied the boy. There was silence, then the boy asked, "What house do you think you'll be in?" Harry shrugged and looked at Ron, arching an eyebrow as if to say house. Ron mouthed, "I'll tell you later." Harry nodded, then said to the boy, "No. Well, no one knows till they get there, really. I bet I'm in Slytherin. My whole family's been. Imagine if you got Hufflepuff." "Yay," said Harry, "imagine. Who are your parents?" Harry's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Where had that question come from? He was about to answer when Madame Malkin returned and said to the boy, "That's you done, my dear. See you at Hogwarts, I suppose," said the boy as he left. Harry smiled grimly in response. As soon as he was gone, Fred hissed, "Harry, what were you doing talking to a Malfoy?" Harry was about to say something when Ron cut in. "Harry didn't know, Fred." "Yeah, but, sod off. Ooh, ickle Ronikins used a. I'm warning you, George." George and Fred broke into a strange song that Harry couldn't follow, but from the way Ron was blushing it was obviously something about him. Harry shook his head and watched Madame Malkin bustle about. "Oak, we've go, robes, books, cauldrons, potions, ingredients, telescope, brass scales, glass phials, what's left?" said Harry as he consulted his list. Mrs. Weasley leaned over his shoulder and said, "Well, we've got to get you a wand and then you can get an animal if you want." Harry nodded, then was steered towards a shop called Ollivander's. Once inside, Mr. Weasley called, "Mr. Ollivander." "Arthur Weasley." Nearly everyone jumped as an old man appeared before them, pale eyes shining in the dark shop. Mr. Ollivander smiled and said, "Maple and dragon heartstring. 13 inches. Flexible." Mr. Weasley nodded and Mr. Ollivander smiled, turning to each of them in turn before he turned on Harry and said, "Ah. Harry Potter, I wondered why I would be seeing you. Let me see. Ah, yes, try this one." Mr. Ollivander handed Harry a wand. "Beechwood and dragon heartstring. 9 inches. Nice and flexible. Just give it a wave." Harry waved it around but Mr. Ollivander snatched it back. "Maple and phoenix feather. 7 inches. Quite whippy. Try." Harry tried, but had the wand snatched out of his hand before he could fully raise it. "No, ebony and unicorn hair, 8.5 inches, springy. Try it out." Harry waved again and again and again. The Weasleys were watching him and by now he felt very foolish and was wondering what exactly Mr. Ollivander was looking for. "I wonder. Perhaps. Yes, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple." Mr. Ollivander handed Harry the wand, who waved it lazily. A shower of silver and red sparks shot out of the wand. Mr. Ollivander seemed delighted. "Very good. Very, very good. Yet very curious." Harry looked up from the wand in his hand and asked, "What's curious?" "I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. Every single wand. It so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand, gave another feather, just one other. It is very curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand with its brother. Why, its brother gave you that scar." Harry blinked. His wand. Brother to Voldemort's wand. Yes, 13.5 inches. Curious indeed how these things happen. The wand chooses the wizard. Remember, I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. Harry shivered involuntarily, looking down at his wand. None of the Weasleys had heard the entire conversation as Mr. Ollivander had spoken in a hushed tone. Harry quickly paid for his wand and they left. A few moments later the Weasleys and Harry were heading back up the alley into the Leaky Cauldron. Mr. Weasley had taken Harry's new owl with him, as owls couldn't travel by flow. One by one, they dragged their things into the fireplace and called out, "The burrow." As soon as they were back at the burrow, Harry, Ron, Fred, and George dumped their stuff in their rooms and went outside. The three Weasleys were adamant to teach Harry about Quidditch and had convinced Mr. Weasley to teach Harry how to fly. "I don't know, boys. Come on, Dad. Harry wants to learn. Don't you, Harry?" Harry nodded vigorously and Mr. Weasley relented. "All right, but if your mother yells at me you two will be degnomming the garden." Fred and George saluted and Mr. Weasley sighed, leading Harry out into the backyard. George was letting Harry borrow his broom for practicing. Harry listened intently as Mr. Weasley explained about flying, gripping the broom tightly in both hands. "You got that, Harry? Yay. Okay, then, give it a go. Fred, you be ready to get him if something happens." "Gotcha. Okay, Harry, let's see what you can do." Harry mounted the broom and kicked off from the ground. And then, he was free. He spiraled upwards then shot back down, going into a steep dive that he heard the Weasleys below him give shouts. But he ignored them. He was in his element. He was meant to fly. No question about that. After executing a number of moves that left the Weasleys below gasping in awe, Harry landed neatly, a wide grin plastered on his face. Fred and George immediately began to pound him on the back in joy. "You're a natural, Harry," said Fred. "Yeah," agreed George, "some of those moves Charlie would probably have a hard time doing." Harry blinked. "Who's Charlie?" "Our older brother. Works in Romania with dragons." "Oh." Mr. Weasley stared at Harry for a moment then said, "Why don't we go inside, boys? I'm sure lunch is ready by now." The four boys nodded and all five headed inside. After lunch, Fred, George, Ron, and Harry flew in the Weasleys' backyard, the four of them rotating off the brooms as there were only three until dinner. Harry was so tired he only ate a little then went upstairs to Ron's room. He was asleep before his head touched his pillow. A month later the Weasleys and Harry had piled 5 trunks into the backseat of the Weasleys' Ford Anglia with 2 owls and a rat in the backseat with the boys and Ginny and were off to King's Cross Station. Once there they got trolleys for their trunks and followed Mrs. Weasley down to where platforms 9 and 10 were. Harry was still a bit confused by what Mrs. Weasley had told him about the platform, but he knew that he wouldn't run into the wall when he went through. "Okay, Percy, you first." Percy pushed his trunk forward and ran at the barrier, vanishing a moment later. Mrs. Weasley then motioned Fred and George forward. "Okay, Harry, dear." Harry nodded and ran for the barrier, instinctively closing his eyes as he did so. When he opened them he saw a steam engine. Looking around, he saw a sign that said Hogwarts Express, platform 9 3/4. Harry beamed. He had done it. Ron came through the barrier a moment later, followed by Mrs. Weasley and Ginny. After much fuss, they all managed to get their trunks and things onto the train and said goodbye to Mrs. Weasley and Ginny. Fred and George yelled things out the window as they left. "We'll send you loads of owls. We'll send you a Hogwarts toilet seat, Ginny." "George, only joking, Mum." Harry shook his head and went with Ron to find an empty compartment. Once they had found one, Ron let Scabbers out of his cage while Harry looked out the window. "Anything off the trolley, dears?" Ron jumped at least 10 feet while Harry smiled back at the smiling, dimpled woman pushing a cart down the car. He nodded and pulled a handful of galleons from his pockets, handing it to her and saying, "A bit o' everything, please." A few minutes later he and Ron were sharing the large amount of sweets. Harry laughed as Ron spit out a dirt-flavored Bertie Bott's bean just as the door of the compartment opened and a girl with bushy brown hair entered. "Neither of you have seen a toad, have you?" Neville's lost one. Both boys shook their heads and the girl frowned slightly. "Well, if you see one, tell me. I'm Hermione Granger." "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." Hermione blinked. "Are you really? I've read all about you." "So, Avenue I," said Harry, rather proud of the fact that he had decided to look up things about himself. "You sound strange." "Yay." Hermione shuffled her feet then said, "Well, tell me if you see Neville's toad." With that she was gone. Ron said, "I hope she's not in whatever house I'm in." Harry laughed. Then the two boys began to talk about Quidditch. The two boys were still talking about Quidditch when the compartment door opened again. Instead of the girl Hermione this time, it was the blonde boy from Madame Malkin's, flanked by two thick-set and extremely mean-looking boys. The boy looked at them and said, "They're saying all up and down the train Harry Potter's in this compartment." His eyes flicked to Harry and he continued, "So, it's you, is it? Wouldn't have known. You don't look like much." Harry smirked. "Neither to ye." He looked at the other two boys and said, "And, they're just show." The boy frowned for a moment then said, "I suppose I was wrong. Oh, this is Crabbe and Goyle. I'm Malfoy, Draco Malfoy." Ron couldn't help but snort with laughter. Draco turned on him and snapped, "Think my name's funny to you? I know what you are. A Weasley." He said, "Weasley," as though it were a nasty stain on his shoe. Ron's ears turned red and he glared at Draco, who had turned back to Harry. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He held out his hand to Harry, who sneered at it. "I think I see and figure out the wrong sort fair myself, thanks," he said icily. Draco's cheeks turned pink and he slowly said, "Be careful, Potter. Wouldn't want to end up in the same way as your parents." Harry's eyes flashed and that was all the warning Draco got. The other boy was on him in a flash, tackling him to the floor and punching him as hard as he could. They ended up out in the hallway, rolling on the floor, Harry keeping the upper hand the entire time. Suddenly they were pulled apart and Harry didn't try to resist. He simply glared at Draco, who was trying to get away from the seventh year holding him back. Shaking his head, Harry easily freed himself from Percy and walked calmly back into the car where Ron still sat, staring at him in awe. As soon as he sat down, Ron asked, "Where did you learn how to do that?" "On the streets," replied Harry. "Ye never knew when ye enterify. You knocked the bloody stuffing out him, Harry." "Yay, I guess I did," said Harry rather proudly. Ron laughed at him then they both looked up at the twins came in, beaming. Fred gave Harry a friendly pound on the back and cried, "Brilliant, Harry. George nodded and said, absolutely spiffing. Add it comin', said Harry. Fred and George exchanged confused looks and Ron said, he said something about Harry's parents. Wouldn't want ter end up in the same way as parents, muttered Harry, darkly. Yeah, that's it. Fred and George exchanged looks again then left them as a disembodied voice said, 5 minutes till we reach Hogwarts. Please leave your luggage on the train, it will be taken to the school separately. Harry and Ron quickly pulled on their robes and left the train. Furs years over here. Ron gaped in awe at the large man while Harry found himself smiling. He had the strangest feeling that he had met him before. Come on, follow me, any more furs years. Mind step, now. Furs years follow me. Neville slipped and let out a yelp but was caught by Harry, who helped the shorter boy back up and gave him a gentle nudge forward. Yale get furs sight o' Hogwarts in a sec, called the man over his shoulder, just round this bend here. Ooh, they suddenly found themselves on the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side was a vast castle with many towers and turrets, its windows winking light down at them. No more in 4 to a boat. Harry and Ron clambered into one of the boats waiting by the edge of the water, followed by Hermione and Neville. Everyone in. Right then. Forward. The fleet of boats moved off all at once. Everyone was silent as they moved across the glass-like lake, each of them staring at the towering castle overhead. Heads down. Everyone ducked as the boats carried them through a curtain of ice that hid an opening in the cliff face. As soon as the boats hit shore, they all clambered out. Oi, you there, is this your toad, Trevor? Cried Neville joyously and ran forward to claim his toad. The man led them up a flight of stone steps to a huge oak door. Everyone here, you there, still got toad? Bang, bang, bang. The man raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. The door swung open and a tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there, looking sternly down at them. The furs years, Professor McGonagall. Thank you, Hagrid, I will take them from here. McGonagall pulled the door wide and they followed her in. Harry watched a doorway to his right, hearing voices drifting through it. McGonagall stopped and turned to face them. Welcome to Hogwarts. The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take you seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. They are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. While you are here your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. Now, form a line and follow me. The first years complied quickly enough and Harry found himself with Ron in front of him and Draco Malfoy behind him, still bearing bruises from their fight. Harry smirked at that then was floored when he saw the Great Hall. Lit by thousands of floating candles, there were 4 long tables laid with glittering gold goblets and plates where the rest of the students were sitting. Another table was at the top of the hall, where the teachers were sitting. McGonagall led them up to there, where they formed a line with the teachers behind them and the students in front of them. Harry turned his eyes skyward and saw an inky black sky dotted with stars where the ceiling should be. Off to his left he heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." Harry shook his head then snapped his eyes up to McGonagall, who had placed a battered wizard's hat on a stool that sat in front of them. A rip suddenly opened at the brim and a song poured out. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty. But don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats sleek and tall. For I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's noting hidden in your head, the sorting hat can't see. So try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong if Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true, and unafraid of toil, are yet in wise old Ravenclaw. If you've a ready mind, where those of wit and larding will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on. Don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none. For I'm a thinking cap. The hall burst into applause and Harry let his eyes drift back up to the ceiling as McGonagall stepped forward holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. Abbott, Hannah, Hufflepuff, Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff, Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw, Brocklehurst, Mandy, Ravenclaw, Brown, Lavender, Gryffindor, Bulstrode, Millicent, Slytherin, Finch Fletchley, Justin, Hufflepuff, Granger, Hermione, Gryffindor. Ron groaned and Harry elbowed him in the ribs. Longbottom, Neville, Gryffindor. Ron's jaw fell open and Harry quickly pushed it back up. The list went on. Malfoy, Draco, Slytherin. And on and on and on and on. Potter, Harry. Ron gave Harry a pat on the back as the other boy stepped forward and walked quickly over to the stool, grabbing the sorting hat and shoving it onto his head so he wouldn't have to see the people staring at him. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes, and a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Anywhere's fine, thought Harry quickly, wanting to get this over as soon as possible. Anywhere. Well, let me see. I know just where to put you. Slytherin. Harry swept the hat off his head and leapt off the stool in one fluid motion, walking swiftly over to the Slytherin table and sitting as far away from Draco as he could get. He looked at Ron, who was looking at him in shock, and smiled weakly before burying his head in his arms to get away from the people staring at him, barely listening to the rest of the sorting. Thomas, Dean, Gryffindor, Turpin, Lisa, Ravenclaw, Weasley, Ronald. Harry's head shot up as he watched a rather green Ron put on the sorting hat. Gryffindor. Harry's heart sank as Ron went off to join his brothers at the Gryffindor table but paused to wave in Harry's direction. Waving weakly back, Harry buried his head in his arms again. Zabini, Blaise, Slytherin. Harry looked up as a severe-looking boy took the seat to his right, then watched as Albus Dumbledore grinned widely at the students as he stood. Welcome. Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak. Thank you. Harry arched an eyebrow at the man, then noticed that the dishes on the table were piled with food. He looked at all of it in awe for a moment, then joyfully dug in, ignoring the dark looks most of the Slytherins were giving him. Ahem. Just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start-of-term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. A few of our older students would do well to remember that. Harry noticed Dumbledore's twinkling blue eyes flash in the direction of the Weasley twins and had to chuckle. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trails will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry was one of the many who did not laugh. He took threats of pain very seriously. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song. Dumbledore gave his wand a flick and a long golden ribbon flew out, twisting itself into words. Everyone pick their favorite tune and off we go. Harry listened as the rest of the students opened their mouths and belted out the song. Everyone finished at different times and the Weasley twins were the last, going at a slow funeral march. Ah, music, a magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime, off you trot. Harry got up from the table and followed a tall boy out of the Great Hall along with the other first years. As he passed Ron in the doorway, he tried to say something but the other boy turned away. Blinking in confusion, Harry followed his new housemates. First year's dorm. Your trunks are at the foot of your beds. Harry looked at the other first-year boys and sneered. He was stuck with Draco, his two cronies, and two other boys. Turning away from them, Harry went down to the bed where his trunk sat and climbed in, only bothering to take off his shoes, outer robes, and tie. He rolled over onto his side, staring at the wall as he listened to the other boys clamber into their own beds. Harry lay awake for a while before sleep finally overtook him. Harry woke up early the next morning at 5:43 according to the ancient, ornate grandfather clock that was in the Slytherin common room. He was sprawled on his back in front of the fireplace looking up at the ceiling, which was made of dark stone, like the rest of the room. The only good point about the Slytherin common room were the plush chairs of assorted shades of green. Everything else was very dark. The moving tapestries on the wall were of wizards killing other wizards, dragons chasing wizards, and other things. Some even had dark-colored spots on them. Blood, thought Harry. As 6 o'clock rolled around, Harry looked up to see a girl coming out of one of the dorms. She looked at him and asked, "Is that comfortable?" Harry pushed himself up onto his elbows and looked at her from under his dark hair. "Eyes much better than wah, I'm used to." The girl arched an eyebrow at him and said, "You're off the streets." Harry smirked. "How'd ye guess?" "Your accent. I've heard them talk. I used to have a friend who lived in the streets." "Oh, I might've known him. He told me his name was Tiles." Harry's eyebrows shot up into his hair and he lifted a hand to brush it back from his face. His eyes were as wide as saucers as he stared at the girl. Ye knew Tiles." The girl nodded and replied, "Yeah. He used to come see me a lot." "So tha's where, E1. I sue. Never figure where, E1. The girl smiled and sank down onto the floor beside him. "So, how'd you know Tiles?" "He told me the only people he knew besides me were street people. I lived WIM. The both o' us were raised by Argyll. He talked about Argyll. Didn't seem to like him. E was nice," said Harry. "But, he fed you. Clothed you." Harry let out a bark of harsh laughter. "Yay, tha's all, did. Res, the time, 'ad us out in the streets pickin' pockets." The girl's eyes widened. "You were a pickpocket. Ye learn, ye don't forget." "Ah." The girl held out her hand and said, "Nevo fair." Harry took her hand and said, "Harry Potter. I know. Yay, lots o' people tell me to. Well, it's true. Yay, famous me." Neve nodded and said, "It must be strange to be from the streets and end up here being famous." "Strange is an understatement." Neve laughed and Harry smiled. "Oh, look, the mudblood and potty. How quaint." Both Neve and Harry whirled around to see Draco standing in the door leading to the boys' dorm, a sneer on his face. He continued, "What's wrong, Potter? Not know a mudblood when you see one?" Harry got to his feet and said, "Sod off, Malfoy. You don't know what it even means, do you?" Harry moved towards Draco slowly, looking more like he was gliding than walking. He stopped when their faces were inches apart, their noses almost touching, and said in a low voice, "I know very well wha I means, Malfoy. And wha avenue ye go again's em." Draco sneered, "They're mudbloods, Potter." Harry's eyes narrowed to slits and he growled, "Ye ad bear watch I, Malfoy." "Or what, Potter? Ye know wha I did on the train." Draco paled then snapped, "Yeah, I'll do worse than da." Draco paled even more and Harry sneered at him before walking back over to Neve, who smiled at him. Harry said, "Lees go downstairs. Bear tear away from im." Neve nodded and vanished into the girls' dorm while Harry roughly shoved Draco aside to get into the boys' dorm. He walked past the other 4 sleeping boys in the dorm and grabbed his bag from beside his trunk. Slinging it over his shoulder, he plowed past Draco again and waited for Neve. As soon as she appeared, the both of them left. "Arg, wah." Harry looked up from his plate to see Neve beating her forehead against the tabletop. "Oi, stop da, wha's got ye in a fuss?" Neve handed him 2 slips of paper, one, which he saw, had his name on it. "Class schedules. Yeah, wah, oh, first class, double potions. With the Gryffindors." Harry handed Neve her schedule back and stuffed his in a pocket of his robes. "Wha's wrong wid the Gryffindors? According to a book I read before I came here, Gryffindor and Slytherin have always been at each other's throats. Don't mean we, Avenue Terby." Then we'd have the whole house against us. There's nothing. Ye show. See, ow I, as on de streets. Some folk rathered kick ye than look at ye. Neve lifted her head, blue eyes dull, and grumbled, so do some of the Gryffindors from what I've heard. Harry shrugged. Well, I fare one woe and pooh, up way I. And, neither show, ye, Neve. All right, Harry, I'll try. Good. Oi, ISN, the potions teacher our head of house. I have no idea, we'd better get to class. Can I Leah's finish eatin'? All right, tonks. No problem. A few minutes later, now we can go. Good, we're going to need to ask where the potions classroom is. Oh bloody hell. Harry and Neve grabbed their bags and left the Great Hall. After finally finding a Ravenclaw prefect who would give them directions, Harry and Neve made their way back down into the dungeons. They found the potions classroom easily enough by following the voices of other students. As soon as they got there, Harry recognized one of the other students in the crowd. Oi, Ron. Ron looked up, frowned when he spotted Harry, then turned around to talk to a sandy-haired boy. Harry frowned then strode forward. He tapped Ron on the shoulder and asked, "Wha's up wid ye?" "I though, we were friends." Ron frowned and said, "We were. Ah, and now we're not 'cause I'm a Slytherin. Ye've go. Some bloody twisted logic Ron." Ron's ears turned red and Harry smirked. "See, even ye know it." Ron snorted. Harry sighed and said, "Come on, Ron. We're friends. Don't house we're in break our friendship." Ron frowned for a moment then nodded. "All right, Harry." Harry beamed. "Glad ter see ye came round." Ron shook his head and chuckled then looked at Neve. "Who's this?" Harry said. "Ron, meet Neve O'Fair." "Neve, Ron Weasley." "Nice to meet you," said Neve. "Muggleborn?" asked Ron, taking Neve's outstretched hand. Neve nodded. "How'd you guess?" "I just guessed." "Yep." Harry shook his head then looked up as a dark-haired man wearing black robes stalked up and threw open the door. He glared at them as they scurried inside and slipped into their seats, following them in and moving to stand behind his desk. Harry and Neve ended up in the two seats farthest back near the door on the Gryffindor side, while Ron had ended up in the front. As the teacher, Snape, began to call roll, Harry looked around at the classroom, of which the main attraction were jars filled with pickled animals. Harry pointed these out to Neve, who made a choking noise. "Potter, Harry." Harry looked up into Snape's cold black eyes and said, "Air." Several people, including Snape, stared at him for a moment. Harry scowled furiously at them and most of them turned away. However, Snape's eyes lingered on him for a moment before turning away. The class was spent making a simple potion to cure boils. Snape swept around the room in his black cloak, watching them. If Harry had been paying less attention to getting his potion correct, he would have noticed Snape's eyes falling on him several times. At the end of the class, Snape walked around and looked at each potion, awarding points to the Slytherins and criticizing the Gryffindors. 5 points for a perfect potion, Potter. I am surprised. Snape ordered them to pack up after that. As Harry threw his potion's ingredients into his cauldron, he wondered what Snape had been talking about. Snape's paw. "Oh, Merlin, he's here, at Hogwarts. Lily's son." "Oh, yes, he could only be Lily's son. No one else could have those eyes. Those eyes that have haunted me in my sleep every night for 10 years. 10 years. 10 years of seeing them staring up at me, cold and lifeless. Stop thinking about that, it's done. You can't change what happened. Humph. I can tell myself that. But is it true? Could I have saved her? Could I? I doubt it, but I still wonder. Damn it, why did he have to be in Slytherin? Or a better question, how in all 9 hells did he get in Slytherin? Lily was a Gryffindor, as was Potter. How on earth could that boy be any different? And what about his accent? It sounds, streetwise. I should know. My own sounded that way at one point in time. Thank Merlin I got over that. Sigh. Oh hell, how can I do this? How can I look into her eyes during class? Her eyes in Potter's, wait. Not truly Potter's face. Not truly at all. I wonder. No, Nothing came from that, so don't consider it. It doesn't do to dwell on the past. Yet I do anyway. Damn. Okay. What is used to make draught of living death? Powdered rue. O asphodel to a infusion o wormwood. Why? Scratch, scratch. I'm writing a report on it for Professor Snape. I don't remember having to write a report on de. Extra credit. Ye need extra credit. One o' the top potion students. Not half as good as you, Harry. You have a knack for making potions. Yay, I heard all about de. Scratch, scratch. Ya know, I think that's the reason Snape likes you so much. 'Cause you're such a good potion student. And you seem to know everything beforehand. Like last class when Neve and Harry looked up to see Madam Hooch enter the Slytherin common room, a roll of parchment in her hand. She looked at them for a moment, then walked over to one of the bare walls and placed the parchment against it. The parchment unrolled and stuck itself to the wall as she turned and walked out. Neve looked at Harry and asked, "Can you see what that's about?" "I really have to finish this essay." "Oh, course." Harry pulled himself out of his chair and walked over to the parchment on the wall. "Flyin' lessons." "Pardon," said Neve without looking up. "I's a boo. Flyin' lessons. We've got 'em tomorrow after charms. We, the Gryffindors." Neve's lips curled in a sneer at this. Harry walked back over to her and sprawled in his chair. "Ye worried? Oh, course. Stupid Gryffindor prats." "Oi, not Ron, silly. I mean, Ron's cool and all. So are his brothers." "Discountin', Percy," said Harry. "Yeah, but the rest of the Gryffindors, I wish they'd get their broomsticks out of the asses. Interestin' a Magri. Thanks. Damn, there's Malfoy. Slimy git." Harry chuckled then scowled as Draco walked over to them. He growled, "Wha, do ye want? No, Malfoy." Draco smiled sinisterly and said, "Who said I wanted anything?" "Go away, Malfoy," spat Neve darkly. "Or what? Oh fair. You'll curse me." "Actually, I will. Ya know, there's a really old curse I found in a book that will." "What was it again, Harry?" "Blow ead up tear the size o' a melon," replied Harry lazily. "No, the other one. Oh, duh. One. Make her feel like her on fire duh. One. Actually burns ye up from dur and see." Draco paled slightly and snapped, "There's no such thing." Harry and Neve exchanged a look, then turned to Draco and asked in low voices, "Do you want to find out?" Draco opened his mouth to say something, then shook his head and vanished into the first-year boys' dorm. Neve looked after him for a moment, then turned to Harry. "I feel sorry for you. Having to sleep in the same room as him and all." Harry shrugged. "I's nah. So bah. I go the be, by the wall. Ease right. In front, o' the door. Welcome to your first flying lesson. Step up to the left side of your brooms. Come on now. Good. Now, hold out your hand and say, up, up. Goo. Bleed and goes." Madam Hooch looked down the line of Slytherins. "Something wrong, Mr. Potter?" "No, ma'am. Just surprised Matt, that's all." Harry shook his head and looked at the broom that had jumped up immediately into his hand. Mr. Weasley had never showed him it would do that. Neve looked at Harry after she got her broom up on the third try and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothin'. Just surprised that's all. Never done de, 'fore." Neve blinked. "You've flown before, yay, Rons, Ian, de twins and, is da, ta, Matt. Cool. What the, oh, my, de, wou, be de, were." Harry and Neve watched as Neville Longbottom lost control of his broom and began zooming about the field where they were standing. When he finally landed, it was with a crunch. Harry winced and whispered to Neve, "Sounds like, he's go a broke rizzes." A few seconds later, "Tut, tut, tut. It's a broken wrist. Come on, up you get. All of you stay here while I take Mr. Longbottom to the hospital wing. If I see one broom in the air, you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch." Neve whirled to stare at Harry as Madam Hooch walked off with Neville. "How do you know?" Harry held up his left arm, which had a strange look about the wrist. "Broke mine myself a many times. I know, ow I, sounds. Bloody, was Malfoy doin' now?" Harry and Neve looked to where Ron was trying to get a sphere-like object from Draco. Give it here, Malfoy. I think not, Weasley. Maybe I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to find. Like on the roof. Draco was in the air a moment later, floating about 20 feet above them. He continued to taunt Ron from there. What's the matter, Weasley? Scared. Ron's ears turned red and he started to climb onto his broom, but Harry beat him to it. He flew up to hover in front of Draco and snarled, "Give I air, Malfoy." Draco's gray eyes narrowed. "Shove off, Potter. I said, give I air, Malfoy." "Fine. You want it. Go and get it." Draco pulled back his arm and threw the sphere. Harry let out an acid remark, then shot after it as Draco dived back to the ground. The sphere soared in an arc, then began to plummet downward. Harry cursed and dived after it, keeping his eyes on the glittering object. He reached out his arm. Caught it. Jerking the broom's handle upwards, he skimmed back across the ground, a mere few inches above it. As he landed beside Neve, he grinned and handed the sphere over to Ron. "Ma, sure Neville G's I, Ron." Ron nodded. "I will." Suddenly someone hissed, "Snape. Potter." Harry looked up to see his head of house storming onto the grounds with McGonagall. "Sir." Snape looked at him, then snapped, "Come with me, Potter." Harry handed his broom to Neve, who smiled at him, then walked after Snape. Inside, Potter. Harry went inside what he could only presume was Snape's office from the resemblances bore to the potions classroom. Sit. Harry sat in one of the chairs placed in front of a dark desk as Snape sat in the chair behind the desk. "Rather interesting stunt you pulled, Potter. What was so important that you had to risk your neck for it?" Malfoy picked up something one o' the Gryffindors dropped. "Neville." Ron was tryin' tear I back, but Malfoy wouldn't. Avenue I. "So you took matters into your own hands?" "Yes, sir." Snape looked at him for a few moments, then smiled. "I'd never have imagined Lily Evans' son would end up in Slytherin." Harry blinked and sat up straight. "Ye knew my mum quite well. We were friends of a sort. But that's not what we're here for, is it? You could have killed yourself today trying to get back Longbottom's remembrall." "I know, but you're an excellent flyer. Have you flown before?" Ron's. Matt Weasley taught you how to fly." "Is da, actually? Well, that's a much better explanation. Did they tell you about Quidditch?" "Yay, good. We desperately need a reserve seeker. Higgs is leaving this year. So, I'll be seeker next year." "That would be correct. Now, head back to your class, Potter. I will speak to Flint tonight." "Flynn. He was voted Quidditch captain this year. Now off with you." Harry nodded and left Snape's office, breaking into a run as soon as he got into the dark, deserted corridor. He was going to be a seeker. Wait till he told Neve and Ron. Snape's paw. I hear him running as soon as he gets out of my office. Silly boy. Merlin. I nearly had a heart attack when I saw him diving. Lily would have come back to haunt me if I'd broken my promise to protect that boy. She told me I was his unofficial guardian a day after he was born. Imagine that. Severus Snape, the guardian of James Potter's son. It actually might be funny if they were still alive. And that boy hadn't grown up on the streets. I wonder why that was. He was supposed to be with Lily's family. Which was the stupidest decision Albus ever made. I told him Lily's sister hated magic and so did her oath of a husband. I told him, damn it. And now look, that boy grew up on the streets. Damn, I should have kept an eye on him over the years. Can't believe Albus didn't find him. 11 years on the street. Merlin, I hate thinking about that. Reminds me of my own time on the streets. Shiver. Don't think about that. It's in the past. Done and gone. Or is it? Is it really in the past when I still bear the scars from the beatings that old orphanage witch used to give? I think not. I hate to imagine what scares that boy has. The streets are harsher now than they were then. Okay. Sev, stop this. Brooding does nothing. Right. Makes me feel better. Harry, it's the Halloween feast. You can't miss it. I see and try. Harry, wah, never mind. Alright, I'll go if I makes happy. Neve grinned and threw her arms about Harry's neck. Thank you. Harry nervously patted her on the back, then they set off for the Great Hall. They were almost there when Neve suddenly said, "Ack, I forgot something. Be right back." Harry peered after her as she sprinted off down the hall, eyebrows knitted in confusion. Oi, Harry, Ron. Ron looked after Neve's retreating form and asked, "Where's she going?" No clue. We'd better get inside. Yay. The two boys entered the Great Hall and went to their respected tables. A few moments later. Troll in the dungeons. Quirrell ran into the hall yelling, his purple turban slightly lopsided. He then gasped, "Thought you'd want to know," and collapsed in the middle of the hall. Pandemonium ensued. Harry watched calmly as students knocked each other down in order to get to the main doors. He even saw Draco trying to get there and laughed inwardly. Silence. A hush fell on the hall and everyone turned to look at Dumbledore. Prefects, led back to your houses. Professors, follow me. As the prefects began to lead the students away, Harry's eyes flicked up to the head table. He saw Snape slip out through a door opposite the one the other professors were leaving by. Curious, he thought. Potter. Harry jumped as one of the Slytherin prefects yelled at him, then quickly ran to join the crowd. As he did, he suddenly remembered something and skidded to a halt. Turning, he plowed through the crowd to Ron's tall form, grabbing his arm as soon as he was close enough. What the? Harry, what? Neve. Ron's eyes registered confusion. Huh. Neve, hissed Harry. She don't know. Ron's eyes widened and Harry quickly dragged him off down a corridor. Where is she? I don't know. Shush. What? Listen. I don't. Harry clamped a hand over Ron's mouth and peered down the hallway. He heard something moving in their direction. A second later a foul stench hit his nose and he pulled Ron into an empty classroom just as the troll rounded the corner. As it lumbered past them, Ron breathed. The trolls left the dungeons. Ye think. Ron scowled at him and Harry pulled him out into the hall just as the troll vanished through a door. We can lock it in, whispered Ron, spotting the key in the lock and springing forward. Harry grabbed the back of his robes and jerked him back. Nah, this the girl's baroom. A shriek suddenly pierced the air and the two boys looked at each other. Neve. Ron and Harry ran into the girls' bathroom and saw Neve cornered by it. Harry drew his wand and yelled the first spell that came to mind. Evancio. Ropes shot out of Harry's wand and bound themselves about the troll, which toppled backwards with a roar. Harry jumped out of the way and yelled, "Neve." Harry. Turning to Ron, Harry hissed, "J-R-O-U, air." What about, G-E-R-O-U, air, Ron? Roared Harry as one of the ropes holding the troll snapped. Ron leapt into action immediately, running around the troll and grabbing Neve's arm. The girl was half frozen in fear and had to be dragged out of the bathroom. As soon as Ron and Neve were out, Harry began to back towards the door. He didn't get that far. The ropes holding the troll suddenly snapped and it got back on its feet, swinging its club at Harry with a roar. Harry dived out of the way like a snake and hurled another spell at it. Sopor. The troll weaved dangerously as the spell hit it and Harry rolled out of the way just as it fell in the spot where he had been. As he stood up, brushing himself off, McGonagall, Quirrell, and Snape ran in. McGonagall gave a gasp and threw her hands over her mouth as Quirrell whimpered and drew back from the troll. Only Snape spotted Harry, who was still calmly brushing dust off his robes. "Mr. Potter." Harry looked up at Snape's voice. "Sir." McGonagall noticed him now and practically screeched, "Explain yourself, Potter." Snape held up a warding hand. "Let me handle him." McGonagall looked ready to protest but Snape fixed her with an icy glare. "He is in my house, Minerva. You may handle, Weasley. Come, Potter." In a swirl of dark robes, Snape stalked out of the bathroom and Harry followed. Harry. Neve threw herself onto Harry as soon as he got to the door leading into the Slytherin dormitories. She obviously had been waiting there. And she didn't notice Snape behind him until the potions master coughed. "Professor." "Silence, oh fair. Potter, would you mind telling me what you were doing in the girls' bathroom with the troll?" Neve was trapped inside. "I see," said Snape slowly. Impressive spellwork, Potter. Not many first-year students can take out a fully grown mountain troll. Harry didn't say anything. He could tell there was something else coming. I, however, suggest you stay out of trouble. The both of you. The black eyes flicked to Harry. Especially you, Potter. Now get inside before I take points. Harry and Neve nodded quickly and watched Snape as he stalked off towards his rooms. Neve then turned to the blank wall in front of them and said, Salazar. The wall slid aside and the two entered the common room. Neve, where were you? Potter, where the hell were you two? We heard Professor Snape. What's going? Bang. Everyone in the room jumped as Harry slammed his fist down on a nearby table. He growled, we were the Grey, all. Neve tripped robes. Professor Snape just now brought us back. Thes now, if ye'll, cuse us. Harry gently grabbed Neve's arm and marched her over to the girls' staircase, glaring coldly at anyone who tried to talk to them. Thanks, Harry, breathed Neve, I don't know what I would have done. Harry smiled. No problem, Nee, why don't ye ge some res? Ye look tired. Hey, your accent's changing. It's beginning to sound, well, different. Like everyone else's. Even forbid. Neve smiled at him and said, good night, Harry. Neve smiled again then vanished up the girls' staircase. Harry frightened her dormmates into hysterics by telling them that he'd turn them into trolls if they asked her one question about what happened earlier. They scampered away from him in fear, causing him to smirk as he retreated to the boys' dormitory. Sitting on his bed, he stroked Hedwig's feathers. His owl often appeared in his dormitory. How he didn't know, but he enjoyed it when she did. When neither Neve nor Ron were around he was lonely. Smiling slightly, Harry changed and climbed into his bed, his long fingers curling in Hedwig's soft feathers as she settled down on the bed beside him. Draco watched Harry and his owl from a crack in the door. As he stood and walked back into the common room he smirked. He had the perfect plan on how to get Harry back for everything. Walking over to the corner where he, Crabbe, Goyle, and Blaise Zabini had retreated to after being sent down from the feast, Draco told them his plan. Crabbe and Goyle laughed while Zabini gave a smirk that mirrored Draco's own. Eventually they had to abandon their table as Flint came in and ordered them to bed. As Draco slid under his covers he looked over the other 4 beds at Harry's. He could see the top of the snowy owl's head and its amber eyes, which were half closed in sleep. Chuckling he softly said, you're going to regret making an enemy of me, Potter. I will make sure of that. Still laughing, he closed his eyes, the image of what he planned to do dancing around inside his head in glee. Harry, you're on the reserves. What have you got to worry about? The Seeker getting it. Neve shook her head at her friend and said, it's very rare that something happens to the Seeker. But this is Gryffindor we're playing, Neve, said Thomas Imber. Oi, stop insulting Gryffindor, Tom. Me and Harry have got a friend in there you know. Sorry, Neve, good, come on. Harry, eat, can't. Harry, no, Harry. Harry scowled at her and she backed off, hands upraised. Okay, you were grumpy this morning. Harry's scowl darkened. Sorry. Thomas looked from one of them to the other then said, you know, you look kind of like Snape when you do that, Harry. Harry blinked, the scowl fading into an O of surprise. Wah, you do. Maybe it's the hair. Harry looked at his hair and said, what's wrong with me hair? Thomas cried, nothing. I'm just saying you look like Professor Snape when you scowl. Or glare. Or sneer. Or IGE, the point. Okay, Potter. Harry looked up to see Marcus Flint glaring down at him. Sighing, he got up and said, see er later. We'll be at the game, Harry. Cried Neve cheerfully after him. Yay, grumbled Harry as he followed the Quidditch team out of the hall. An hour later he was sitting in the Slytherin changing room in his Quidditch robes, half listening to Flint as he practically yelled at the first team. Leaning back in his seat, he ran his hand over the handle of the school broom he had been given. Potter. Harry's eyes flew open as one of the reserve beaters, a third-year named William Cleave, shook him awake. Come on, Potter, the game started. Harry got wearily up and followed William to where the reserves sat during the game. As soon as he had a view of the stands, he began to look for Neve. He was still looking when there was a loud yell from the Slytherin stands. Harry turned his eyes back to the game and saw the Slytherin seeker Terence Higgs falling from 50 feet up. Yells erupted from around him as the 7th year landed on the ground with a loud crunch. Madam Hooch hurried out onto the field and knelt by Higgs for a moment before she floated him off the field. A moment later Flint flew down to where the reserves were and yelled at Harry. "You're up, Potter." Harry looked at him for a moment, then leapt on his broom and kicked off into the air. "And now here comes the reserve Slytherin seeker, Harry Potter." Harry ignored the voice of Lee Jordan and began to look for the snitch. He spotted the Gryffindor seeker across the field and ignored him, only paying attention to looking for the snitch. "Go, Harry." Harry looked towards the Slytherin stands and saw Neve bouncing up and down in her seat, waving a green flag wildly and waving at him. He waved sheepishly back, then ducked as one of the Weasley twins sent a bludger his way. Fred blew past him, yelling, "Told ya it was dangerous." "Only when playin'," yelled Harry back. Fred only grinned and raced after the bludger. Harry shook his head and spun the school broom around as something gold shot past him. As he barreled down the field after the snitch, he saw the Gryffindor seeker race towards him out of the corner of his eye. Gritting his teeth, he reached out to grab the snitch, and nearly got thrown off his broom. Clutching tightly to it, he looked frantically around the field for what could be causing it. As the broom bucked him forward, he saw Snape in the stands, muttering nonstop under his breath. His eyes and Harry's locked for one fleeting moment before the broom rolled Harry over. Then he saw Quirrell. The defense teacher also had his eyes locked on Harry, but his lips weren't moving. However, his expression told wonders. Harry hissed in anger, then was suddenly thrown off the broom as it rolled over again. He hung from it, grasping only with one hand as it continued to buck. Sending a furious scowl in the direction of Quirrell, he waved furiously at Neve, who was staring up at him in horror. When he was sure she had spotted him, he pointed at Quirrell, then had to stop as the broom jerked wildly. Neve looked where Harry was pointing, then grabbed Thomas's pair of omnioculars. "Oi!" Neve ignored him and focused in on the stand where Harry had pointed. She gasped when she saw Snape and Quirrell both keeping their eyes locked on Harry. Throwing the omnioculars back at Thomas, she raced out of the stand and ran for the one where the two professors sat. Drawing her wand as she bounded up the stairs, she quickly tried to recall the hexes from the book she had read and then given to Harry to read. Not finding any that could possibly make a broom act against its user, she thought up another curse. Scrambling up the stairs, she swung around, pointed her wand upwards at Quirrell's feet and hissed out the words of the spell. Congolo. Above her, Quirrell froze and she ran, knowing the spell only lasted 20 seconds. Running back to where she could see Harry, she watched as he swung back up onto his broom, then reached out his right hand fast as a striking snake at something in the air. A moment later he held up the snitch in his clenched fist and yelled, "I go snitch." The Slytherin stands erupted in cheers and Neve bounced up and down as she watched the Slytherin team fly up and pound Harry on the back as he grinned widely. Neve cheered and waved up at him. When he waved back, she turned to see Quirrell fixing her with an icy glare. Shivering, she turned and ran, missing Snape's look of surprise cast in her direction. Harry looked up as a tornado of black hair rushed up and plowed into him, knocking him back several feet. "Get off, Neve ignored him and hugged him tighter. She looked up at him, blue eyes wide. "Harry, I was so scared. I thought you were going to fall." "Same, air." He looked down at her and asked softly, "Did ye see?" "Did ye?" Neve nodded and replied, "I did. It was Quirrell. He glared at me and, oh, Harry. It was worse than Snape when he looks at the Gryffindors." Harry nodded and said, "I'm okay now, You're sure?" "Yay. Ye think I wouldn't know if I was okay?" Neve laughed. "No, I'm sure you would." "Good. Now where'd Ron Ge to? I haven't seen him. He was a second ago." Oh, here comes Flint." Harry looked up and saw Flint, disengaging himself from Neve. Flint looked at her, then at Harry. He said, "Seems you're on first team for the rest of the year, Potter." Harry blinked and asked, "What about Higgs? Broke both leg, his right arm, and cracked most of his ribs. He won't be flying again anytime soon. Flint paused for a moment then continued, practice is after dinner every Tuesday and Thursday and before breakfast on Friday. You got that, Potter? Harry nodded. Yay, good, and nice catch by the way. With that Flint walked off and Ron ran up. Harry, that was amazing. Harry grinned wryly and asked, do ye mean, how I stayed on broom or caw, the snitch? Ron beamed goofily and replied, both. He then leaned close and whispered, you know, I think Fred and George deliberately hit Higgs. I think they wanted you out on the field. Matt, why? You know Fred and George. Nobody knows what's going on in their heads. Let alone them. Harry laughed and slung his arm about the shoulders of his two friends and said, "Le's go back up tear the castle." "All right then," said Ron. "Lead the way, kind sir," cried Neve with a wide grin. Harry beamed and said, "Don't mind if I do," and they began to walk. As soon as they reached the castle steps he stopped. Neve looked up at him in confusion. "Harry, what's wrong? Where's Malfoy?" Ron crinkled his nose and asked, "Why would you want to know?" "'Cause he'd be, tauntin' me or somethin's not right." Neve smiled and hugged her taller friend, saying, "Harry, you worry too much." "Maybe, but I'd like to know where Malfoy is." As they started up into the hall there was a loud screech and something fell from a window up above him. A flock of giggling girls behind them shrieked as it landed in the midst of them. Harry whirled around as one yelled, "It's an owl." His face paled as he suddenly remembered something. Ron frowned and asked, "Harry, what's up?" "Hedwig," whispered Harry. Hedwig, I left in the dorm this mornin'." Neve blinked then slapped her hands to her mouth. Harry ignored her and plunged through the crowd of girls. "Jay, out o' my way ye bloody bint." Harry shoved a girl aside then choked as he looked down at his owl's broken body. Looking up at the window from which she fell he saw a pale, pointed face and white blonde hair. Snarling, he shoved his way through the crowd and charged up the stairs into the castle. He heard Ron and Neve yelling after him but ignored them. Charging up to the 4th floor he caught sight of Draco scampering around the corner. Pulling out his wand he roared, "Evancio!" Ropes shot out of his wand and barreled around the corner. A moment later he heard a thump. Rushing around the corner teeth bared, he leapt on Draco with a howl. Draco shrieked in a girl-like pitch and writhed against his bonds but Harry held him down. A moment later he was pummeling the other boy with punches and cursing him. "Ye bastard! Ye bloody bastard! Ow Sue! Ye bloody bastard!" Harry. Strong arms pulled Harry up off of Draco but he kept flailing, trying to hit the other boy. "No, lemme go. Killed. Harry. Harry was held tightly as he still tried to get away from whoever was holding him as Madame Pomfrey banished the ropes around Draco and examined him. McGonagall, Sprout, Flitwick, and the other teachers appeared behind her. Except for Snape, but that thought didn't register with Harry as he was still fighting mad. Dormio. Harry slumped in Snape's arms as the man cast the sleeping charm on the boy. Madame Pomfrey had already conjured up a stretcher for Draco and gave him a firm look. "Bring him." Snape acknowledged her with a nod and swept Harry up into his arms, noting how light the boy was and a light tracery of scars along his left arm, from which the sleeve of the robes was torn. As he walked past Neve she asked, "Will he be all right, sir? He won't get expelled, will he?" Snape looked down at the girl and replied, "That is for the headmaster to decide, Miss O'Fair." Neve ducked her head and Snape walked on, never noticing the limp bundle of snowy feathers the girl held in her arms. "Out, Severus, I will not have you hovering over my patients. These are my students, Poppy. And I wish to talk with the both of them. Then I will call you when they are awake." "I think I shall wait," said Snape, crossing his arms over his chest. Madame Pomfrey gave him an icy glare then walked over to stand beside Harry's bed. Snape looked at the boy then found that he had no idea why the boy had attacked Draco. Suddenly the door of the hospital wing opened and Neve entered, followed by Ron. Snape frowned at them and asked, "Miss O'Fair, Mr. Weasley, would you mind explaining why you are here?" Neve shifted a white bundle in her arms and Ron said, We wanted to see if Harry was awake." Snape frowned then looked at the bundle. What is that? Neve pulled the bundle closer and softly said, Harry's owl, sir. Malfoy. She ducked her head, burying her face in the bundle. Ron wrapped an arm about her shoulders in a comforting gesture. Snape frowned and said, so that's why Potter attacked Malfoy. Yes, sir, said Ron. Well then, return to your common room, Mr. Weasley, sneered Snape. Ron scowled at him but left when Neve gave him a gentle shove and a whispered, go. Casting one last glare at Snape, Ron squeezed Neve's shoulder reassuringly then left. Snape looked at Neve and said, take Potter's owl down to Hagrid. Then return to your common room. Neve clutched the bundle of feathers tighter and asked, can I not stay? I really wanted to talk to Harry. You may talk to him later. For now return to your common room. And remember to take that owl down to Hagrid. Neve nodded and began to leave but turned back before she got to the door. Why am I taking her to Hagrid? To be buried. Oh, sir, I don't think Harry would like that. Snape sighed and said, then return to the common room, Miss O'Fare. I will come and get you when Potter is awake. Thank you, sir. Neve smiled sheepishly then ran out of the hospital wing. Snape shook his head and looked over at Pomfrey, who was staring at him. He snapped, what are you looking at? Pomfrey simply shook her head and vanished into her office. Snape sighed and sank into a chair, his eyes focused on the still forms of Draco and Harry. Harry groaned and lifted his head, pushing himself up onto his elbows. Looking around, he saw that he was in the hospital wing. Brushing his hair back out of his face he suddenly saw Snape sitting in a chair at the end of his bed. Sitting straight up he said, Professor. Snape nodded slightly and said, Potter. Sir, I know what happened, Potter. Your friends Miss O'Fare and Mr. Weasley informed me of it. Snape's eyes narrowed as he continued, though I believe beating Mr. Malfoy up was not good choice to make. Harry nodded. I know, sir, but he killed your owl. Yes, Professor. Still no such excuse to brutalize him. Harry sighed and said, I know I wasn't right, terre de too, I am. But, he did kill Hedwig. Snape nodded, and for that he will have detention with me for a month. As will you. Yes, sir. Good. Report to me once you are out of here. Yes, sir. Snape nodded then rose and began to leave but stopped when Harry asked, do ye know what happened to Hedwig, Professor? Miss O'Fare took her. Thank you, Professor. Snape looked at Harry, avoiding the familiar green eyes. With a sharp nod he walked quickly out of the hospital wing. Harry looked up to see Neve rush in through the door, blue eyes narrowing when she saw Draco asleep in the bed beside Harry's. She then turned to her friend and said, Professor Snape told me you were awake. Harry nodded then asked thickly, where's Hedwig? I gave her to Professor Snape. He said he knew what to do. He doesn't bury, said Harry glumly, sinking down under the covers. Neve pulled herself up to sit on the edge of his bed and said, your accent's different again. Really? Yeah, it's back to the way it was when we first met. Ow, interestin'. Harry, sorry, I'm just sorry I didn't get a chance to beat on Malfoy more. Neve frowned then snarled, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to do something to him. How could he do that to Hedwig? Lee's na talk a boo, Okay, so what do you want to talk about? I don't know. Ye pick something. Okay, chess. Nah, hexes and curses. Alry, I believe this is yours, Potter. Harry and Neve looked up from where they had been looking at Neve's book of hexes and curses to see Snape come in with a small statue. Snape placed the statue on the table beside Harry's bed then walked off, glancing once at the book open on Harry's lap. As soon as he was gone Harry reached around Neve to pick up the statue and blinked several times. Look, what? Oh my, it's Hedwig. Harry turned the small statue over in his hand. It fit perfectly in his hand. His owl was perfectly preserved, sitting on a tiny silver stand with her wings half opened as if she was about to take flight. Harry smiled and sat the statue on the bedside table before turning back to Neve and the book. Is he awake yet? Nah, good. Ron, no. What? I'm just going to hit him. Hey, where'd it go? Harry How'd you get it? Harry twirled the silver plate Ron was going to hit Draco with between his hands and replied, I was a pickpocket on Streets. Okay. That explains that. So, how long are you in here? Harry shrugged and sat the plate on the bedside table beside Hedwig's statue. Very reluctantly. Neve's eyebrows knitted together as she frowned slightly. She asked, Are you okay? As I see in GE, replied Harry darkly, casting a mild glare in Draco's direction. Ron shared the glare then turned back to Harry. So, what has Snape got you doing? Detention fair a month. Malfoy. Neve's mouth dropped open and she gasped, Is he mad? You two in the same classroom after this? Alone. God, I don't even want to know what he's thinking. Not very well, suggested Ron, earning a look from Neve. Harry shook his head at his two friends then turned to Neve. Did ye see the game? Quirrell. Neve nodded and Ron blinked. Hold on, I saw Snape. Hermione said he was jinxing your broom. Harry arched an eyebrow and asked, Why wou, Snape do da? I'm in his house. And I wasn't him. I was Quirrell. Quirrell, said Ron in amazement. Harry nodded. Yay. Nee saw. I hexed him too, said Neve rather proudly. Then she said softer. He looked at me. God, it was horrible. Worse than Snape when he looks at the Gryffindors. Ron blinked at her and breathed, You're joking. No. That's bad. So, why did he do it? Both looked back at Harry who frowned. This the question. Why did do I? Neve and Ron looked at each other then back at Harry. None of them knew the answer to that question. You may go, Mr. Potter. Harry scooped up Hedwig's statue and Neve's book from the table and left the hospital wing as quickly as he could. For some reason he couldn't stand to be in there. As classes had already begun the halls were empty as he walked back down to the Slytherin dormitory. The only living thing he saw on his way was Mrs. Norris, who rubbed up against his leg in a friendly manner. Harry bent and petted the cat, which had taken a liking to him the first time she had seen him. After a few moments he rose and walked on, Mrs. Norris following him until he entered the dungeons, where she strayed off down another hall. Harry crept past Snape's classroom, where the sounds of Snape berating some hapless Gryffindor third year trailed out. Shaking his head, he walked on down to where the door to the dormitories was hidden. Serpens. The stone wall slid aside and Harry entered the dormitory, better known as Arx Serpens. Heading into the first-year boys' dorms he put Hedwig's statue and Neve's book into his trunk and muttered, Aromahola, over it before grabbing his bag and heading for class. Well, Potter. Fancy seeing you here. Harry looked up from his lunch at the drawling voice and a sneer automatically crossed his features. His eyes narrowed into slits of green fire as he coldly said, Malfoy. Draco's gray eyes widened for a moment, fear flashing in their depths, then it was gone. He looked down his nose at Harry, as if the other boy was a piece of dirt. Several of the Slytherins watched them with wide eyes, obviously remembering what happened last time the two of them were together. Neve's voice broke the glaring contest they were having. Leave him, Harry, he's not worth it. Harry turned from Draco and looked into her blue eyes, saw her silently begging him not to get into another fight. He nodded slightly and they both rose to leave. As they left Draco called after them, the great Harry Potter under the control of a mudblood. What will the world come to next? Harry's temper shot up and he pulled out his wand, whirling around and aiming it straight at Draco's head. Gasps went up from around the hall and the Slytherins in between him and Draco moved away quickly. Neve reached up and gently grabbed his wrist, pushing it firmly down as she wrenched his wand out of her hand. She aimed a glare that could have killed at Draco if it were so possible, pocketed Harry's wand, then frog marched him out of the hall. No one noticed Snape staring in wide-eyed wonder at Harry. That prat, that complete and total braggart. I'd like to curse that smirk off his sodding face. Harry watched Neve as she paced from one end of the hearthrug to the other, raging about Draco's behavior. Everyone else was at dinner, the two of them having skipped it, Harry because of Draco and Neve because she felt she would curse Draco the next time she saw him. Suddenly the wall slid aside and Draco entered, grinning smugly at Neve, who froze in mid-step and glared daggers at him before pulling out her wand. Draco looked at Harry and asked with a smirk, "Going to call her off?" Harry looked up at Draco's from under his dark hair, which had fallen in his face, and replied, "Nah. I actually like tear see brains all over da floor." He then looked at Neve and said, "Try not tear I on the chairs. I rather like 'em." Neve smiled, a malicious little smile, and softly said, "Of course, Harry," as Draco glared at Harry then stared at Neve in horror. The dark-haired girl smirked then waved her wand in a vaguely star-shaped pattern. Dolor acidus. Draco went to his knees with a groan and clutched at his stomach. His gray eyes blazed as he eyed Neve with a look of pure hatred. She simply smiled smugly in response then said, "That is what happens when you insult a mudblood, Malfoy. You'd do well to remember it next time." Harry smirked at her throwing Draco's insult back in his face then rose to his feet gracefully. "Ye'd better let I am go, nee. Wouldn't wan. Professor Snape tear suspect anything's amiss." Neve nodded and waved her wand again, this time in a reverse star pattern. Draco rose shakily to his feet, his face red from the hex, and spat, "You'll regret that, oh fair." Harry stalked forward in decidedly Snape-like manner and grabbed Draco by the front of his robes, shoving him up against the wall and putting his face in the other boys. "Ye do anything, and I mean anything, to me and I find out about it ye'll end up the hospital wing again. And ye won't be OU, till the end o' the year. Understand?" Draco had apparently given up on trying not to look scared of Harry or he simply couldn't help himself. Gray eyes wide and face pallid, he nodded fiercely, either too scared to use his tongue or too afraid to. He knew firsthand what Harry could do in a fight. Harry sneered yet again in a very Snape-like manner, and slung Draco around, throwing backwards into the chair he had just vacated. He gave him the same look Draco had given him at lunch then turned to Neve and said, "I'll see later." Neve nodded and smiled at him, the corners of her mouth twitching as it threatened to become a full-fledged grin. Harry returned the smile then left Arc Serpens, hearing Draco coming behind him. As the two entered the potions classroom, Snape looked up from grading a stack of papers. "Ah, I was wondering when you two would show up. Malfoy, you'll be sorting those ingredients over there into the ingredients store. In alphabetical order." Draco looked at the large pile of various things and sundry then asked in a rather nasal tone, "What will Potter be doing, sir?" Snape's cold, black eyes turned on Draco and he snapped, "That is none of your business, Mr. Malfoy. Now, to work." As soon as Draco was busily working, Snape turned to Harry. He studied the boy for a moment then said, "You, Potter, shall be helping me. Follow." Harry followed him into his office and saw a cauldron sitting on a table, purple flames dancing under it. Snape pointed at a pile of snake fangs on the table and said, "Crush those, Potter, then chop up the belladonna roots. Even pieces, thank you." Harry nodded and silently got to work. Snape took the ingredients as he finished them, giving him new instructions each time. Soon they were done, or so Harry thought. "Now, I need a drop of your blood, Potter." Harry blinked. "Sir, your blood, Potter, your blood. Give me your arm." Harry frowned but didn't dare argue with a teacher. Let alone Snape, the teacher he feared most, despite him being his head of house, yet respected the most as well. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing his very pale skin, which 11 years on the street had never darkened, and a good many scars, each showing up as a faded white or light fawn color. Snape seemed to wince at this but Harry took no notice to this. He watched as Snape ran a small knife across one of the smaller veins in his wrist and let the blood drip down into a bowl. Snape watched him for a reaction the entire time but Harry's face stayed impassive. He was used to seeing his own blood, often staining the floor beneath him. After what seemed hours, Snape healed the wound with a light tap from his wand and poured the blood into the potion. It sizzled and turned from bright yellow to a brilliant shade of crimson. As the two watched, it bubbled and frothed then turned a shade of emerald green. The same color as Harry's eyes. Snape looked at him and said huskily, "Thank you, Potter. You may leave. Tell Mr. Malfoy he may as well." Harry nodded and left Snape's office, one question rattling through his mind. Why did Snape give him that odd, slightly proud yet fearful look? Albus. Albus. The door flew open and Dumbledore peered out of it, his blue eyes wide behind his half-moon spectacles. Severus. What is all the commotion? Snape moved past him into the office and pulled a phial out of his cloak. He held it up and said, "This is Proserpia potion. I brewed it just an hour ago." He added, "Potter helped me." Dumbledore's eyebrows arched at this as he moved to sit back down behind his desk. "Harry, Severus." Snape nodded. I used his blood in it." Dumbledore's eyebrows arched even more now. "Why? You remember the little scene in the hall earlier between Harry and Draco? How could one forget? Do you also remember who was once in that same position?" Dumbledore smiled and replied, "Of course. Yourself and James." Snape nodded. "You also noticed one other little factor that was the same." "Yes, Miss O'Fare did act remarkably as Lily did in that position." Snape turned his eyes to the floor and Dumbledore asked, "What is this all about, Severus?" The dark eyes lifted and met the light blue. "Harry is my son. Arx Serpens. Serpent's Keep. Aromahola. Opposite of Alohomora, don't know what in the heck that means. Dolor Acidus. Sharp pain. Proserpia. Family. Harry is my son." Chapter 9. Are you sure, Severus? The potion does not lie. It turns the color of the child's parents' houses. For Lily, green for me. Are you going to tell him? I don't know. Should I? Wait a bit, perhaps. A year perhaps. Though the time is however you feel you should tell him. How is it that he looks like James? He doesn't. I know. Yet there is still a small resemblance. A charm, I suppose. They were Lily's forte. I know. How did this happen? We were only together once. Twice. How did you know? Never mind. Don't answer that. You were together twice and Harry is the result, Severus. He is your son. I know. Merlin's beard. I'm a father. I'm a father. It's Albus, Severus, Albus, Severus, Albus, etc., etc., if ye want ter know. What are ye two doin'? Harry and Neve walked into the library and saw Ron and Hermione sitting over at a table with two other Gryffindors. Ron looked up and grinned as they approached. "Hey, Harry, do I not get a hello?" asked Neve irritably. "Course you do. Hey, Neve, thank you, Ron. Hold on a second, Hermione." Hermione looked up and blinked. "Neve." Harry looked from one girl to the other and asked, "Ye two know each other?" The two girls nodded. Neve said, "Yeah, we live right beside each other," said Hermione. "Ooh," said both boys. The two girls frowned at them and both snapped, "Shut up." Harry chuckled then asked, "So, what are ye two lookin' fair?" Hermione replied, "Nothing," rather too quickly. Harry narrowed his eyes. "Okay, now I know lookin' fair somethin' does na goo. Ron, wha is it?" Ron looked at Hermione, who glared at him, then back to Harry, who also glared at him. "They're looking up something," Hermione heard from Hagrid. "Neve." "What?" snapped Neve. "This is Harry. You can trust him." But nothing. Harry, can't you be trusted?" Harry smirked and replied, "Ani to a poen. Be serious." "I am bein' serious." Neve rolled her eyes and turned back to Hermione. "Never mind him. He can be trusted. Ye do remember that I'm a pickpocket, don't ye, nee?" "Yes, Harry. Means I can't be trusted." He grinned at Hermione and added, "In some situations is." Hermione smiled weakly in return then sighed and said, all right. I'll tell you." "Excellent," cried Neve and pulled out a chair. Harry sat on the table next to Ron, ignoring the look Madame Pants was giving him. Hermione looked around them then began to explain in a low voice. "See, Neve's parents wouldn't let her come here. Sodding tramps. Be quiet, Nee. Anyway, Professor McGonagall came and explained everything to them and they let her come. But on the condition that someone else came and got her. So, Hagrid came and got the both of us since we live right beside each other. Is there a point to this? Be qui, Ron. Hagrid took us to Diagon Alley to buy our things about 2 weeks before start of term. That's when we were there. Ron. Thank you, Harry. Anyway, Hagrid took us there and got something from one of the vaults at Gringotts. Number 713 to be exact. Now, A few days into term, Ron received a copy of the Daily Prophet that said that someone had tried to break into Gringotts. To get to vault number 713. Wah, Sue, be so important. I'm getting to that. Now, just after the Quidditch match, I talked to Hagrid. And he said that whatever he took from Gringotts was between Professor Dumbledore and someone called Nicholas Flamel. And you and Ron have been looking for that ever since? Asked Neve. Yeah, well, and we also ran into a three-headed dog on the 3rd floor, muttered Ron. You were on the 3rd floor. The forbidden floor. Ron and Hermione nodded. How? Got lost, replied Ron. Neve sighed. Then Harry asked, What does the dog, Avenue Tear, do with Flamel? It was standing on something. A trap door. I think that whatever Hagrid took out of the Gringotts vault is down there, replied Hermione. And what is a sorcerer's stone? Harry blinked. The stone to see and turn anything into gold and produce the elixir o' life. You've heard about it. Ye think the only thing on me mind is Quidditch. Hermione flushed. It's not. I read Pliny. So, who do ye think I is? Who is? Asked Hermione bewilderedly. Try and tear get the stone. I don't know. I think I's Quirrell. Quirrell, cried 3 voices. Stuttering Quirrell, said Ron. Quirrell who's scared of his own shadow? Asked Neve. Harry, how can it be Professor Quirrell? He's what? Asked Harry, leaning forward with narrowed eyes and a severe expression on his face. Too innocent. Yeah, that stutter is plumb scary, said Ron jokingly. Harry scowled at him then growled, Fools! Never judge a boo by eye's cover. Furs, rule in pickpocketry. He continued, softer, Quirrell tried tear kill me the Quidditch match. I don't trust. I am as far as I see and throw, I am. Which and far? There was a long silence between the 4. Then Hermione began, It could have been. What? Snapped Harry, turning towards her. Snape, I think nah. Me own head o' house try and tear kill me. Thin, again. But he was muttering. A counter curse most likely. But a jinx, does nah. Avenue tear be spoken. Hermione's eyes went wide. Quirrell was watching you rather closely. Harry smiled and said, Ye see. Hermione nodded and Harry grinned widely at her. He then looked down at his watch and said, Come on, Nee. We've go. Transfiguration in 10 minutes. Neve nodded and the 2 of them picked up their bags and left. Ron and Hermione walked out after them and as they headed down the hallway Ron called, See you 2 in potions. Harry waved back over his shoulder in reply and he and Neve hurried on. A few weeks later the Christmas holidays had come. Harry and Neve were the only Slytherins left in Arx Serpens and they found out that Ron and his brothers were all alone in Gryffindor Tower. Harry was woken up Christmas morning by Neve rushing into the boys' dorm and leaping onto his bed, yelling at him at the same time. Harry, wake up, it's Christmas. Harry opened his eyes blearily and looked up into Neve's bright blue ones. Wah, Christmas, Harry, presents. Harry shot awake. Avenue presents. Yeah, come on. Harry rushed into the common room, where a pile of presents was placed under the Christmas tree that had been placed there. He grinned at Neve, who grinned back. Then the 2 of them dived into the pile. Neve received a box of chocolate frogs from Ron, a book on the dark arts from Hermione, a book called Advanced Hexes and Curses from Harry, and a 50-pence piece from her parents. She scowled at it then tossed it into the fire. Harry shook his head then handed her another of her presents, which was a tiny snake statue from her older sister. Harry got a box of chocolate frogs from Ron as well, a book on Quidditch from Hermione, Thins I've go, Quidditch on the brain, muttered Harry, an emerald green sweater and tin of homemade fudge from Mrs. Weasley, a box of their own joke items from Fred and George, a box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans from Ginny, and a book on hexes and curses from Neve. Hey, Harry, this is yours too. Harry picked up the feather-light package and opened it. A card lay inside, words written on it in a loopy swirl that he didn't recognize. Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you. Neve craned her neck and asked, What is it? I don't know. A cloak I thin. Let's see it then. Harry ripped the paper away from the soft, silvery material, letting it cascade down to the floor. He slipped it about his shoulders and heard a gasp from Neve. "Wah, Harry, look down." He looked. Eyes an invisibility cloak. "I read a boo, I am. They're really rare." Neve stared wide-eyed at him and gasped, "Who would have sent you that?" "I don't know. There wasn't a name on the card." "Wow, I bet Malfoy hasn't got one of these." Harry grinned and took off the cloak, sitting it down beside him. He bet Draco didn't either. "Okay, that's it, I think. Hold on, where'd that raven come from?" "Wah, raven." Something landed on Harry's shoulder and he turned to see a raven sitting there, gray talons clinging to his pajama top, the pitch-black feathers glistened with rainbow highlights. A pair of pale yellow eyes looked into his own, then the raven held out one of its legs, to which a small roll of parchment was tied. Harry untied it and looked at it, not recognizing the spidery scrawl with which it was written except that it looked somewhat like his own writing. "A replacement for your owl. He is at your command and can carry messages as well as any owl. Merry Christmas." "Wow," breathed Harry, looking at the raven on his shoulder. "What is it?" asked Neve. Harry handed her the note silently and she read it. "Wow, a raven. Who do you think sent him?" Harry ran his hand over the silky soft feathers on the raven's beak and said, "I don't know. But he's wonderful. I wish I knew who sent. I am so I sue, thank him. E won't replace Hedwig, but E is beautiful." Neve smiled and asked, "What are you going to name him?" Harry instantly replied, "Jarden," then blinked. He looked at the raven sitting on his shoulder, who looked back with his pale eyes. Eyes that were a tad too intelligent for a mere bird. Too intelligent for a mere bird is right. "I am not a mere bird." Harry blinked. "Ye can understand us." Jarden nodded. "Of course. I am a very special raven. The only one in existence that can talk. And name is Jarden." "Duh. Was you that suggested it, Rye?" "Yes. And you are Harry Potter. My new owner." "Yay. A pleasure. And who is the lady?" "Neve. Neve O'Fair. She's me friend." "I see. How about something to eat? Ye go up to the Ollery Fair that." "What? How am I supposed to keep you? We're only allowed tea, avenue an owl, a cat, or a toad." "All taken care of. How do ye know?" "I simply do. Neve is looking at you." Harry looked from Jarden to Neve, who was staring at him. "Wah, you, never mind. Let's go get something to eat." Harry nodded and gathered up his Christmas presents, heading back into the dorm. A few minutes later he was back in the common room wearing a pair of dark muggle jeans and Mrs. Weasley's sweater. He had tied his hair back in a ponytail as it had grown beyond shoulder length and Jarden sat on his shoulder. Neve appeared a moment later in jeans and a black sweater and they left. "Food. Yes, Jarden. We're goin' ter eat. Anything for me?" "I s'pose. I will go to the Ollery if you wish." "Nah, stay. I want ter show ye ter Ron." "Who is he?" "My other friend." "I see. He stays somewhere else." "Yay. He's in Gryffindor. Me and Neve are in Slytherin." "I see." Jarden was silent after that and Harry and Neve talked about Quidditch all the way up to Gryffindor Tower. Harry smiled at the fat lady and asked, "Is Ron still inside?" The portrait smiled warmly at him, most of them did, and replied, "Yes, dearie, he and those brothers of his are still inside." "See, and I am." The fat lady nodded and the portrait swung open. Harry entered and saw Ron laughing as the twins shoved a sweater with a P on it over Percy's head, knocking his glasses askew. Harry laughed and all four of them looked up. "Harry, what are you doing in here? And what's that?" Harry gestured at the fat lady's portrait and said, "Sheila, me in. And this is Jarden." "Wow, where'd he come from?" "Don't know. Oversent. I didn't sign the note." Ron grinned and Jarden asked, "Is this your friend?" "Yes, Jarden. This is Ron Weasley. Those are his brothers Fred and George. They're twins, and Percy." Percy's the one with glasses and Fred and George had the first letter of their names on their sweaters. "I see." Harry grinned and said, "Come on. Le's go downstairs and see the hall." Ron only grinned wider and followed him out past the fat lady, Fred and George dragging a trapped Percy along after them, earning laughter from Neve as soon as she saw him. "Potter." Harry looked up from his breakfast to see Marcus Flint walking very quickly towards him. It was a week after Christmas holidays and apparently close to the next Quidditch match. Yay, we've got to play Hufflepuff in a week. Normally they're a pushover, but with that new seeker of theirs. They say he's good, but I wouldn't know. I expect you to be at every practice, understand? Harry nodded and said, "Oh course." "Good," grunted Flint and walked off. As soon as he was gone, Neve said, "The nerve. Wah, ordering you around like he's an army general or something. He's Quidditch captain. Is job tear order me around." Neve gave him a disgruntled look, then looked up at the ceiling. "Mail's here. And there's Jarden." The raven winged in with the owls, earning a few surprised shouts and pointed fingers. He flew down and landed on Harry's shoulder, dropping a letter into his plate. Harry stroked his feathers and picked it up, shaking a bit of egg off of it. "Who's it from?" "Ron." Harry opened the letter and read it, poking Neve and showing it to her once he was done. "Harry, we've got trouble. Hermione dragged me down to Hagrid's hut yesterday. He's got a dragon, a Norwegian ridgeback, which are real vicious. It bit me too. At least it was my left hand, not my right." Neve whispered, "How does that constitute as trouble?" "He'll get out of class." Harry replied, "Keep readin'. Trouble is, Malfoy saw Norbert, that's what Hagrid named that vicious little thing. Hermione convinced Hagrid to get rid of Norbert before he gets in trouble." "Why would he get in trouble? Dragon breedin's illegal." "Oh, anyway, she had me write my brother Charlie, you didn't meet him at the Burrow, and ask if he could take Norbert. Some friends of his are coming Wednesday night to the tallest tower." "What exactly does this have to do with us?" "Keep readin'. Hermione decided to wrangle you two into it by saying the three of you could take Norbert up to the tower to meet Charlie's friends. I'd be there too, but I'm stuck in the hospital wing. Hands swollen to twice its size and is green." "Is that bad?" "Ron." Neve frowned at the letter and said, "Poor Ron. Poor Ron. Poor us. Hagrid's got a dragon that we, Avenue Terre, get rid of, and Malfoy knows about. We are much more poor to Ron in this situation, Neve." Neve nodded and Harry looked over at the Gryffindor table. Hermione caught his eye and arched her eyebrows. Harry nodded slightly, then turned away, stuffing the letter in his pocket. Jarden had hopped down to the table and was eating his eggs. "Jarden." The raven batted a pale eye at him and said, "I'm hungry." "Oh, all right, eat my food. I'm too nervous to eat anyway." "What is going on?" "Nothing really. Hermione just wrangled me and Neve into a plot to get rid of an illegal dragon by taking it up to the tallest tower on Wednesday night to give to some friends of Ron's brother Charlie." "Sounds dangerous." "You have no idea. You can do it. You have an invisibility cloak after all." Harry blinked at the raven. "Good point. All of my points are good." Harry chuckled softly at his raven, which seemed to smirk at him. "Hey, Potter, you know ravens aren't allowed, don't you?" Harry and Neve both turned to glare down at the table at Draco and were about to say something when a smooth voice came from behind them. "The circumstances are special, Mr. Malfoy." The headmaster informed the teachers of the situation himself. "Mr. Potter's raven has as much right to be here as the eagle owl that is about to relieve itself on your shoulder." Draco turned his head to his owl and shrieked, "Ack!" Snape and Harry smirked at the exact same time, earning a wide-eyed stare from Neve. Then Snape turned to Harry and said, "An interesting gift, Mr. Potter." Harry nodded and stroked Jarden's back as the raven pecked at his toast. He smiled and said, "Yay. If only I knew who sent, I'd like tear than He's not Hedwig, but Jarden's wonderful in his own way." Snape nodded. "I am certain he is, Mr. Potter. Good day." As he walked off, Neve hissed, "My God." Harry looked at her in confusion and said, "Wah. You, spit it, oh you, Neve, eyes wide as saucers, leaned forward and whispered, "You and Professor Snape looked just alike when you smirked." "Wah." Harry smiled sheepishly at those around them, then hissed, "Wah, are ye implying, we're related or something?" "I never said that. I just said you looked alike when you smirked." "Yay, I heard ye. And then there's the hair." Harry scowled at her. "Wah, about me hair." Neve held up her hands in defense and replied, I never said there was anything wrong with it. It's just that. Just that what? Well, you know over Christmas halls when the water didn't work in the dungeons. Yay. Me hair got greasy. Lee, it did on the streets. Was point. That's just it, Harry. Snape's hair is greasy and yours got greasy. Surely that means something. Yay. When neither of us takes a bath, our hair g's greasy. Harry, I was implyin' that, don't take a bath. Well, it sure sounded like it. Harry sighed and closed his eyes. See and we talk about this later. Yeah, sure, tonks. Harry turned back to Jordan, who was pecking at the last remnants of his toast. Harry, do you think Snape and I look alike? The Raven tilted his head at Harry, then looked up at Snape sitting at the end of the staff table talking to Quirrell. A little. You both have long, dark hair and are pale and have a few similar expressions, but beyond that nothing. Why? Nee said something about it. Surely you heard her. Sorry. Paying attention to the toast. You sound like Ron. Jordan blinked a pale gold eye at him. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Harry shrugged and replied, take it as you will. He looked around, then turned back to the Raven. You probably should head back up to the Ollery now. I could just go down to the dungeons. Harry shivered at the thought, remembering leaving Hedwig down there before the Quidditch match. No, I don't want you down there without me with you. That's how Hedwig got killed. Jordan appeared solemn and bobbed his head. I see. Then I shall come visit you after classes. Dinner it is. By the by, when are you going to tell your friends I can talk? Harry frowned and replied, I wasn't actually considering it. I would consider telling them. While you have been talking to me, Neve has been calling you. Damn, spat Harry, then looked at Neve. Harry, I'm air. No need tear shout. What's goin' on? Class, you daft goose. Come on, we've got Transfiguration with the Hufflepuffs. I know, Nee, and I goes something tear tell ye on the way. Really, let's go then. Alry. Harry gathered his bag and looked at Jordan, who was rustling his feathers irritably on the table. He looked and saw Quirrell eyeing the Raven coldly. Yes, Harry, why is Quirrell looking at you like that? There was a pause, then the Raven replied. I don't know, but I get a bad feeling off of him. Makes two o' us, muttered Harry under his breath. He thought at Jordan. Well, be careful. I don't want to lose you like I lost Hedwig. No problem there, Harry. I have more gifts than just being able to talk. Glad to hear that. Oh, and I'm going to tell Neve that you can talk on our way to Transfiguration. Will she believe you? If she doesn't, you can have a little chat with her tonight, can't you? Harry swore the Raven gave a mental smirk. An excellent point, my dear Dominus. I think I shall leave before that creature burns a hole in my head by simply glaring at me. Good day. Harry watched as Jordan took flight and flew over his and Neve's heads as they exited the hall. As they walked, he wondered what the word, Dominus, meant. You mean to tell me that the Raven you got for Christmas can talk? Keep her voice down. And, yay, can. Harry, I know this is the wizarding world, but ravens don't talk. Said he's the only one who can. Come on, Nee, believe me. Neve frowned. I'll believe you if I hear it from him. Harry beamed. Alry, he's goin' tear be comin' down tear the dungeons tonight, after dinner. Ye see and talk to. I am then. Well, that's settled. Miss O'Fair, Mr. Potter, would you mind horribly getting back to class? Harry and Neve both looked sheepishly up at McGonagall, who was frowning at them. Sorry, Professor. Sorry, Professor. Said McGonagall and returned to teaching. Harry cast a sidelong glance at Draco, who appeared to be looking at him rather strangely. Had he heard what Harry and Neve were talking about? So, how do I do this? Harry sighed and explained how to talk to Jordan again. Ye just think what ye want. Tear say and direct I am. Replies in the same way. Neve took a deep breath and said, okay. Here goes. Jordan, yes. Bloody. Both Jordan and Neve looked at Harry, who had tumbled out of his chair. Harry, what happened? Harry sat up and said in a hushed tone, I heard ye. I heard ye talkin' to. I am, Nee. Neve blinked while Jarden looked rather smug. Well, that's supposed to happen. It is, yes. Harry arched an eyebrow. How's that? Well, according to what I know, there used to be many more of my kind. In different forms. Your kind, said Neve. Jarden bobbed his head in a nod. Talking birds. How do you know? I am actually several hundred years old. We're immortal to a point, you know. Harry and Neve shared a glance, then Harry asked, what's the point? The killing curse, replied Jarden. We can block any other form of magic. Except for that, Grindelwald and his followers killed my kind. I am the last as far as I know. Neve frowned and said, oh, Jarden. Don't pity me, milady. Neve looked a bit taken aback, but Harry shook his head at her. So, how come I can hear Neve when she's talking to you? Ah, each of my kind forms a special bond with a certain wizard. We stay with them for all our lives after we've found them. Until they die. Then we travel on, looking for the next person. I had been looking for you, Harry, since I hatched 400 years ago. Harry blinked. What? That's impossible. Jarden shook his head. Not necessarily. Dumbledore's Phoenix Fox is one of my kind, much older than myself. According to him, he was once Godric Gryffindor's and had been waiting ever since Gryffindor died for Dumbledore. So, you guys already know who to go to next. Of course. And about the hearing thing. Ah, we are bound, you and I. You can hear the thoughts of anyone speaking to me. If you were a telepath, I could do the same. But I'm not. Certainly not. My kind do not bond to telepaths for that specific reason. We have a sort of inner alarm to avoid that from happening. What if your next bond is a telepath? Jarden shifted from Talon to Talon before replying. We slowly go mad from the influx of thoughts. Neve gasped. Oh my God, that's horrible. Nee, calm down. Oh, I can hear you, Harry. That is because you are communicating through me. You've been hearing him the entire time. Oh my, maybe we should call it a night. A good idea. Oh, Jar, hold on a minute. I want you to take a letter to Ron and another to Hermione. Jarden nodded and Harry pulled the 2 letters from his pocket, tying one to each of the raven's legs. The raven looked at both of them, then gave a short nod. Good night. Night, Jar. Good night, Jarden. A moment later he was gone and Neve and Harry were left to watch each other. So, we can talk to each other while he's around. Yay, I suppose so. You know, your voice is different when you, what would you call it? Thinking it, maybe. Anyway, it sounds, you know, normal. Normal. Ye mean Lee. Everyone else's. Yeah, there's na normal fair me, Nee. Good night, Harry. Good night, Nee. As Harry stalked off into the boys' dorm, Neve whispered, good night, Harry. Dominus. Lord, Master. Stop moving. I'm na. Both of you hush. If we're heard we're dead. Neve, Hermione, and Harry pushed the wooden crate that held Norbert along a dark corridor under the invisibility cloak. Hermione had performed a hovering charm on it so they wouldn't have to lug it up and down stairs. Get off my foot. I'm na on foo, Nee. Then, bloody hell, it's Mrs. Norris. The 3 students looked down in horror at the cat, who was standing on Neve's invisible foot and looking up at them. Harry hissed, get on, Nori. Don't tell Filch we were, my girl. The cat looked up at him then meowed. Harry smiled and whispered, tonks, Nori. Mrs. Norris meowed again and they moved on, the cat patting softly after them. As they went Neve whispered, how did you do that? Oh, quite taken care me, cat is. We understand each other. Don't we, Nori? The cat meowed once more then bounded off into the shadows. I hope she's not going to get Filch, muttered Neve. Nah, she's had plenty o' chance to do tear me when I've been you, at night. She won't get, I am. I hope you're right, Harry. And when have you been out at night? Hey, Aaron. There, we're almost there. The 3 of them instantly fell silent as Hermione hissed those words. They climbed to the top of the tower and shed the invisibility cloak. A few minutes later they turned Norbert over to Charlie's friends and, with wide grins, began to descend from the tower. At the last moment Neve hissed, "The cloak." Looking at each other in horror, they turned to sprint back up the stairs when lamplight fell on them. Turning, they all quavered at the sight of Argus Filch. Neve hissed, "Harry, you ass. That cat gave us away." Mrs. Norris suddenly appeared behind Filch and gave Harry a sorrowful look and a soft meow. Harry nodded vaguely at her and hissed back at Neve, "Filch goes a boo, the school on, his own. Nori did and betray us." Neve spat, "Well, we're still in trouble." "Good point, duh." Filch frowned at them and said, "Sneaking out of your dormitories at night, eh? Well, we'll be seeing Professor McGonagall and Snape about this, won't we? Come along." Harry and Neve exchanged a horrified glance, then turned to Hermione, who looked equally horrified. "Why do you have to drag us into this, my own?" Hermione sighed and said, "I couldn't handle Norbert on my own and Ron had been bitten. There was no one else I knew who'd help." Harry sighed and said, "She's got a point, nee. Leave off. We're gonna Avenue detention anyway. Yeah, for something we got dragged into." Harry rolled his eyes and said, "Drop, nee. All right, sorry, my own, it's okay. I'm mad at myself right now. I can't believe we forgot the cloak." "Shish," hissed both Neve and Harry, clamping their hands over her mouth. Hermione mumbled something that sounded like, "What?" behind their hands and the two rolled their eyes. It was going to be a long night. Out after curfew is one thing, but telling Mr. Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon. "I did not expect that from you, Miss Granger." McGonagall's eyes shifted to Harry and Neve, both of whom bristled visibly. Neve did. The only reaction Harry showed was a light in his eyes that came and went quickly. Neve, however, glared at the Transfiguration teach with barely disguised fury. "Nee, calm down, Harry, she's implying that we told Malfoy about the you-know-what. Ye think I don't know that? I'm more worried aboo, Snape." McGonagall frowned at them and said, "And you two will be serving detention with Miss Granger and Mr. Malfoy." Draco, who has already been in the room with McGonagall, cried, "What?" Harry blandly said, "Detention, Malfoy. Surely ye know wha that is. Or are ye actually that daft?" Draco glared at Harry and looked ready to launch himself at the other boy's throat but stopped quite suddenly and backed off, from both the cold look Harry had given him and McGonagall's glare. "And you, Mr. Potter. 50 points from Slytherin." Harry looked at her and simply nodded. He'd get the points back in the next Quidditch match. So what if he got brown-nosed by the other Slytherins? Most of them only paid attention to him because he was the Harry Potter or because he was the Seeker who had won them the match against Gryffindor. He'd been kicked and beaten down on the streets. He could take whatever the Slytherins could dish out and more. As for you Miss O'Fare and Mr. Malfoy, 50 points as well. Same for you, Miss Granger. Now back to your dormitories. I will send notice when your detention shall be." The four of them trailed out under McGonagall's stern gaze, not saying anything until they were out of her office. Draco sneered at them and said, "Hanging around with mudbloods. How low can you get, Potter?" Harry bristled inwardly and sneered, "Ye'd take kindly care remember that these two mudbloods are the smartest students in the year and see in hex sorry ass before you knew what'd happened." The two boys scowled at each other, eyeing each other with contempt. Neve and Hermione smartly stayed out of the conflict. After a few moments Draco turned away from their locked gazes and Harry smirked. As the blonde turned and walked off he said, "See you in the dorm, Potter. Tell your Raven hello, for me." Harry bristled visibly this time and clenched his fists until blood ran. As soon as Draco was gone he spat bitterly on the ground and snarled in a soft voice, "Ye touch a feather on Jarden, Malfoy, and it'll be the last thing ye touch for a long while." Behind him Hermione and Neve exchanged glances then moved forward, each placing a hand on Harry's shoulders. He tensed at the touch then relaxed, looking at each of them in turn. Neve gently pried open his fist to look at his hand, her eyes softening when she saw the cuts his fingernails had made in his palm. She turned her face up to him and said, "You shouldn't let him get to you like that, Harry. He does it deliberately." Harry scowled at her and snapped, "Ye think I don't know that? Bloody knee, that's the reason I want tear break his sodding head against the stones. He looked down at his bloodied palm and added, I've never been so angry in me life. Niamh frowned. Not even to Argyll. Hermione blinked in confusion whilst Harry shook his head, closing his eyes. He softly said, Nah. Not even Argyll. I didn't like. I am but. His eyes opened and he glared off in the direction where Draco had vanished. But I never hated. I am. Hermione gasped. Hate is a strong word, Harry. There's no other word for it, Hermione. I hate Draco Malfoy. Niamh and Hermione exchanged another glance, then Harry said, We'd better back, knee. 'Fore Filch catches us again. Niamh nodded and the three of them said goodnight, heading their separate ways. Harry left Niamh to return to Arx Serpens on her own as he went to get the invisibility cloak. When he returned, he went immediately into the boys' dormitory, only pausing long enough to curl his lip in a sneer at Draco's sleeping form. Niamh watched him from her chair in the common room as he stood there, watching with other boy with the utmost contempt. A moment later the door closed and he was gone. Niamh sighed and curled up in the large, overstuffed chair, running her fingers over the soft, emerald green fabric. Calling out to Jardan, she silently asked a question. Could Harry go dark? No answer tempted her question. She supposed the raven was too far away, high up in the Olary, or flying out in the night. Unlike Harry, she was not bound to the bird and could only speak to him when he was near. Tucking her hands under her cheek, Niamh watched the fire until the dancing flames sang her to sleep with their soft crackling. Harry and Niamh were eating a late breakfast at the Slytherin table when two owls flew into the hall, one heading for them and the other for Hermione. As the owl landed on the table in front of them, Niamh winced visibly while Harry untied the letter from the owl, which flew off a moment later. Unrolling it, he held it so Niamh could read it at the same time. Your detention shall be served at 8 o'clock. Meet Mr. Filch in the entrance hall. M. McGonagall, I have a feeling this is not going to be fun. Harry laughed harshly and said, O course it's not, Nee. It's detention. You guys too. Harry and Niamh nodded as they met up with Ron and Hermione outside the Great Hall. Man, said Ron, I wonder what you guys are doing. Harry shrugged then said, whatever it is, I won't be good. I see and tell Yida. And you know what's worse? Prompted Niamh. What? We have to serve it with Malfoy. Malfoy. So he got caught. Tried to get us caught too. So, who caught you guys? Asked Ron bewilderedly. Filch, said Harry, Hermione, and Niamh at the same time. Harry got Mrs. Norris to go away though. Ron looked at his friend in amazement for a moment then said, Remind me to take you if we go exploring through the school. Harry groaned then said, Come on, Nee. Potions. Ah, joyful day. I get to see Malfoy, once again. And then again after that. And again, and again. Isn't it such a joy to be in the same house as him? Yay, joyful, replied Harry, completely deadpan. I'm being sarcastic here, Harry. So am I. Niamh rolled her eyes then said, Come along, my friends. We have a potions class to get to. How can you be so cheerful? Groaned Ron. As a Slytherin, I don't get yelled at by Professor Snape. However, we do yelled at by other teachers, finished Harry. Niamh whacked the back of his head and cried, Don't finish my sentences. Oh, sod off, Harry, shrieked Hermione. Harry half smiled at her and said, Sorry. Ye hear things on the streets, you know. Like what? Asked Ron, receiving a whack in the back of the head by Hermione. Ow, you don't need to know, Ron. Well, no need to hit me. Humph. Harry glared at them and said disgruntledly, Come on, ye two. Ye won't be late. Ron and Hermione shook their heads and they were off. At 8 o'clock sharp, Harry and Niamh made their way up to the entrance hall from the dungeons. When they arrived, Hermione, Draco, and Filch were already there. Filch gave them all a piercing look then led them outside. You'll be serving detention with Hagrid tonight. Niamh and Hermione looked at each other. Harry, on the other hand, was occupied with trying not to sneer at Draco. Suddenly, Hagrid's hut loomed up out of the dark, and with it, Hagrid himself. He looked at them and said, 4. Filch said, yes, these 4. I'll be back to collect them. He laughed harshly and added, what's left of them, that is. With that he vanished into the dark, Neve looking after him in surprise. Hermione turned to Hagrid and asked, what was that about? Hagrid replied, we've got to go enter the forest. There's been a unicorn hurt bad by Summit. And, you 4 are going to help me look. Draco cried, the forest. We can't go in there. There's werewolves. Harry smirked and said, don't tell me you're scared, Malfoy. Draco turned on him in a flash, a look of haughty arrogance replacing the fear of earlier. I'm not scared, Potter. Could have fooled me, muttered Neve. Draco glared at her and would have started forward, but Hagrid said, Alright. Let's go. And so they plunged into the forest, following along behind Hagrid and Fang, their wands lit and held high above their heads as their eyes watched the dark trees around them. Alright, Hermione, Malfoy, you come with me. Neve, Harry, you take Fang. Harry and Neve nodded and started off, the big black boarhound following them. Hagrid's booming voice called after them, and, stay on the trail. Neve waved in acknowledgement and then Hagrid, Hermione, and Draco vanished in the gray mist that drifted through the forest. Okay, said Harry, we're looking for an injured unicorn. Simple enough. Neve shook her head at him and said, aren't you ever worried? Nah, really, why, I don't know, you always seem so unafraid. Oh, to 11 years on the streets. Oi, look. Harry pointed at a spot on the ground and Neve knelt down to look at it, holding her wand close. She looked up at him and said, unicorn blood. Slowly, she reached out and touched the silver substance. It's still warm. Harry nodded and lifted his wand high, eyes scanning the shadows around them. He said, we're close then. Come on. Neve nodded and rose to her feet and they continued on. I wish we had Jarden. He could fly ahead and look. Harry shook his head. Nah, Jarden couldn't see out here any better than we see in. Good point. Hey, Fang, what's wrong? The big boarhound had been walking in front of them during the entire time they had been talking, his nose to the ground. Now he was backing up, whimpering. Neve tried to console the dog as Harry moved forward and peered around a large tree. What? Oh my god. The unicorn lay before them, legs splayed out, showing a clear, pearly white against the dark ground. The magnificent head was thrown back, as though it had been fighting even as it fell. And by its neck, head bent low, was a figure shrouded in a dark cloak. Fang let out a howl and ran. The figure's head snapped up and Harry could see silver blood dripping from what looked like gleaming fangs. Beside him, Neve convulsed and fell to the ground, emptying the contents of her stomach as she went. Harry threw himself in front of her, drawing his wand in a futile attempt to protect his friend. The creature drew closer and with it came a sharp pain in Harry's scar. He focused around it as best he could, but as the figure came nearer, he could no longer. Collapsing onto the ground in front of Neve, he kept her behind him. If this creature was going to kill them, it'd have to take him before it took his friend. Harry could feel the harsh breath of it on his face, his scar pounding so loudly he almost fell unconscious. Then, there was a thunder of hooves and something sailed overhead. The hooded figure weaved back as the black shape reared up, 4 hooves flailing wildly. A light shone in the dark and Harry's head cleared. When he looked, the figure was gone. And in its place was another unicorn, black as pitch with small dashes of gray in its otherwise unmarked coat. Its horn was crooked yet smooth as glass, reflecting the light from Neve's wand, which she still clutched in her hand. The unicorn moved towards them, eyes glittering with intelligence. Harry had read that unicorns preferred girls to boys, but those were normal unicorns. This one was obviously a Darkhorn, said to be evil. Harry reached out a tentative hand and brushed his long fingers against the velvet soft muzzle. He smiled and whispered, "Thank you." The unicorn seemed to smile with its eyes and nickered softly, nipping his fingers gently, before turning and vanishing into the darkness of the forest. Harry looked after it in awe, then turned to Neve. "Harry, what happened?" Hermione ran forward as she saw them, still sitting on the ground where they had fallen. Behind her came Fang, Hagrid, and Draco. The older man spotted the dead unicorn and let out a sigh. Then he asked, "Ye all right, Harry?" Harry nodded and said, "Yea. I don't know about me, though. Well, let's get up tear the castle. Come on, you lot." Harry and Hermione helped Neve to her feet and started to walk with her, but gave that up when Neve's knees buckled and she slipped in their grasp. Hagrid handed his lantern to Harry, then swept Neve up into his arms, lumbering off. Harry, Hermione, and Draco drifted after him, Harry's thoughts lingering in the forest. With the Darkhorn, Severus sighed as he collapsed into a chair in his rooms, his right hand lingering on a spot on his left arm. He looked at the fire, absently rubbing his thumb over a certain spot. "I was sure it tingled," he thought, turning his gaze from the fire to his arm. Underneath his pale skin he could see it, a shade of silver gray. Lying, waiting for its master to come and reawaken it, to sound out the call once more. Severus shivered. He hoped it would never come to that. He hoped the call would never pull at him again. For his sake, and for Harry's. "You're joking." "Nah, Harry, please, tell me you're joking." "Nee, I'm not joking. It was him, Voldemort." Ron winced and said, "Don't say the name." Hermione asked, "How do you know, Harry?" Harry gave an exasperated sigh and asked, "Well, who else who I be? He's the one who gave me this scar. It, ad tear, avenue been him." "You're sure about this?" "Yea." Neve frowned and looked at Ron and Hermione. "But why would he be in the forest? Unicorn blood see and save ye, even if an inch from death." "Harry, how do you know these things?" "I read, Nee. Now look. Professor Dumbledore tall. Me Voldemort." "Stop saying the name," hissed Ron, vanished after. "E killed me parents. E didn't say, E died. So, whose tear say that was in him out there?" Neve sighed. "Harry, oh, come on, Nee. Me scar. I think I connects me and I am." "Why do you think that?" asked Hermione. "Because no one else has ever made my scar hurt as badly as I did in the forest. It's him. I know I." "So," said Hermione, "what's he doing here?" Ron and Neve both looked at Harry, who was staring off into space. "Goo question. What would he be doing here?" A few days later Harry and Neve were in defense against the dark arts, listening to Quirrell go on and on about something. They hadn't been listening for a while. In fact, they had been talking. "Has your scar been hurting any more, Harry?" "Nah, I'd have told ye if I had." "Really?" "Yay, Nee, me friend. Why would I? I'd something like to from you." Neve smiled. "I'm glad you think of me as a friend, Harry. Welcome." "Ow, Harry, what's, oh?" Harry hissed in pain and clapped a hand over his scar. No one else in the room noticed, too busy either copying down notes or talking amongst themselves. Harry looked up and saw Quirrell turned around, his back towards them. His eyes locked on the back of his head, and a flash of pain similar to the one he had gotten in the forest shot through his head. He hissed again and ducked down. The pain in his scar slowly ebbed away, but he wasn't paying attention to that anymore. He was putting two and two together. A hand fell on his shoulder and he jumped, jerking his head up. Neve looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, "Harry, what's wrong?" Harry looked at Quirrell's still turned back, keeping his eyes away from the back of his head. A cold smile twisted his lips as he replied, "I figured out, Nee." "What? Why Voldemort is heir?" Neve gasped. Then they both quickly picked up their quills and Quirrell turned back around. The next day being Saturday, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neve all met in an empty classroom. Harry cast a soundproof charm on the room, then turned back to his three friends. Ron asked, "So, what's with all the secrecy, Harry?" "I figured out." "What?" asked Hermione. "Why Voldemort is heir." Ron and Hermione gaped. Harry smiled weakly at them, then began to speak. "Alright. If Voldemort is heir, what would he naturally do?" Ron frowned, but Hermione only took a moment to think of it. "He'd go after you." "Exactly. And who has done to?" Ron frowned some more, then said, "Snape." Harry and Neve scowled at him and he gulped, then said in a shaking voice, "QQ Quirrell. Excellent. Impersonatin'. Yay, Quirrell. He tried ter kill me, the match." "But," said Hermione, What does you know who have to do with Professor Quirrell? Harry sighed and said, Quirrell is Voldemort. What? Said both Ron and Hermione. In defense yesterday, Quirrell turned round and I had pain in me scar again. And there's ony pain in me scar when Voldemort is around, finished Neve, faltering for a moment when Harry glared at her. So, you're saying you know who is Quirrell? How can that be? Harry sighed and shrugged. I don't know. But I do know one thing. If Voldemort was drinkin' unicorn blood tear stay alive, he's lookin' fair something else. Something that'll keep I am alive longer. He gave Hermione a pointed look as he said this. Oh, the stone. That's it, isn't it? Harry nodded. The stone. The elixir of life. He wants it. Shouldn't we tell Dumbledore? Asked Ron. Goo. Idea. Hold on. The three of them looked at Neve, who was frowning. What? Asked Ron. Hermione, you told me that Hagrid had gotten that dragon egg from a stranger in a pub. Yes. So, what sort of stranger carries around dragon eggs in their pockets? And just so happens to give it to Hagrid who, if you remember our time with him, wants nothing else in the world but a dragon. It took a moment for her words to sink in, then they all went, oh. Harry quickly said, Ron, ye go ask Hagrid about the dragon egg. Where are you going? Asked Ron as Harry turned and took the soundproof charm off the room, then ran out the door. Neve yelled after him, where are you going? Chair talk chair McGonagall. Why, just go talk chair, Hagrid, fool. Neve frowned, then grabbed Ron and Hermione's arms and growled, let's go. Harry flew down the halls, ducking past other students and even running down little Professor Flitwick, who he paused to help back up. When he finally got to McGonagall's office, he was panting slightly, but not enough to hamper his voice. Professor. McGonagall looked up from whatever she was doing at her desk and said, Mr. Potter. Is there a problem? I need to see Professor Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore is away. He received an urgent owl from the Ministry of Magic. Harry gasped, gone. Now, I need to talk to I am. McGonagall frowned and said, Professor Dumbledore has other things to do other than run this school, Mr. Potter. Nothing could possibly be more important than the Ministry. But this is a boo, the Sorcerer's Stone. What? How do you know about the stone? Nevermind, someone's goin' to steal I. McGonagall frowned again and snapped, I don't know how you found out about the stone, Mr. Potter, but I assure you, it is very well protected. Now, return to your dormitory. Professor. Now, Mr. Potter. Harry sighed and left the room, kicking the wall and hissing an acid curse as he walked on. Well, she did, and believe me. And Dumbledore's gone. Gone. Ministry business. What did ye find out from Hagrid? You were right, said Neve. Hermione nodded and said, he got it from a stranger in a pub. And talked to him about Fluffy. Fluffy, gasped Harry. The three-headed dog. Thing is called Fluffy. Apparently. Anyway, Hagrid was talking to us and then he let it slip how to get past Fluffy. Chair the trap door. Yes, and if he told us. Harry gaped at Hermione. He probably told the stranger in the pub. Exactly. Damn. Must have been Quirrell. So, now what? Asked Ron. We go down the trap door, said Harry. Tonight. Ow. Get off my foot. Sorry, Herm. Will the both o' ye shut up? I'm not in the tear caw. By Filch again. Sorry, Harry. Yeah, sorry. Harry sighed and the four of them crept forward under the invisibility cloak. Harry jumped in surprise then hissed, don't do that, Jardin. Sorry, never mind. Filch anywhere in sight. A pause then. No, Mrs. Norris is wandering about up here but nothing else. Nori, did she see you? Possibly. But she didn't run for Filch. Must have smelled me on you. Pardon, never mind. Just keep an eye out for Filch, Jar. I will. Ron whispered, what did he say? Harry replied, he said Filch is nowhere in sight. We're safe. He had only told Ron and Hermione about Jardin's rather special ability of speech just before they had set off. Hermione had believed him, having read about the type of bird Jardin was, but Ron had only believed after Jordan had talked to him in a rather snappy way that had reminded Harry of Snape. They crept on down the hallways until they finally came to the entrance to the third-floor corridor, shedding the invisibility cloak. Harry tucked it into a hidden alcove then straightened, allowing Jordan to take up his perch on his shoulder. Looking at his friends, he said, "Le's go." Ron pulled the door open and they all slipped inside. Sure this the door. Yes, Harry, locked. Alohomora. Harry stuffed his wand back into his pocket and pulled the door open. The gentle strumming of a harp drifted out and he breathed, ease already, air. The four of them crept inside, closing the door behind them. Fluffy was asleep, all three heads snoring softly. Harry motioned at the other three and said, Avenue Terre move, is paw. He pointed at the trapdoor, which was under one of Fluffy's huge paws. The four of them grabbed a hold and pushed. They pulled the trap door open and looked down, seeing nothing but darkness gaping up at them. Harry said, ye go first. Harry, go, Neve. Neve nodded and jumped. Ron then asked, who's next? Harry replied, I'll go. He then froze. Isn't I a bit quiet? Jordan suddenly screamed in his head, fly. Fly, what? The three of them looked up and saw 3 pairs of jaws lined with sharp teeth above them. Ron dove for the hole as Fluffy's middle head lunged at them. It caught the trapdoor and tore it off its hinges. Harry pushed Hermione and then grabbed Jordan and jumped as the left head snapped at him. Oof, caw. Jordan escaped Harry's hold on him and flew upwards, hovering. Ron suddenly said, good thing this plant's here. Plant, look at yourself, man, screamed Neve. Ron jumped as vines shot out and wrapped themselves around him, Harry, and Hermione. Neve was already caught in them. Hold still, Ron, this thing'll kill ye if ye don't. Kill me, well, gee, thanks, Harry. That makes me feel so much better. Harry scowled and looked at Hermione, who was trying to get her wand out. Hermione, it's Devil's Snare, Harry. It doesn't like fire. So start one, yelled Neve before a vine covered her mouth. How? Cried Hermione. There's no wood. Are you a witch or not? Bellowed Ron and Harry together. Oh, Lacarnum inflammare. Flames shot out of her wand onto the plant, which pulled its vines back in, releasing them. Harry staggered up and over to Neve, pulling her to her feet. Ron glared at Hermione and muttered, no wood. No wood. Oh, shut up, Ron. Ron looked taken aback and Harry rolled his eyes. He snapped, come on. If Quirrell G's the stone, we're done fair. Ron snapped back into life and the four of them continued. Hear that? Wah, that flapping sound. Nah. I hear it too. It's coming from up ahead. What do you think it is? Don't know. Le's find out. The four of them suddenly walked into a lit chamber with a high ceiling that vanished into the shadows above them. And flitting about, their wings glittering, were hundreds of what appeared to be birds. I've never seen birds like this before, breathed Hermione. They're not birds, said Harry, his sharp eyes picking out what the so-called birds really were. They're keys. Keys. Yay. So, began Neve. One must fit that door. Finished Ron, earning a glare from Neve and ignoring it as he pointed at the door across the room. But which one is it? Asked Hermione, looking up at the keys. Ron and Neve crossed to the door and peered at the lock for a moment before Neve said, we're looking for a big, old-fashioned one, probably silver. Harry looked then pointed up at one key. There. One. Harry. Broomsticks. Hermione pointed at 2 broomsticks that were hovering behind them. They must have missed them when they came in. We've got Terre catch, said Harry, rushing over to the brooms and grabbing one. Ron grabbed the other one and they both swung onto them, kicking off into the air. Hermione and Neve watched them and they dove after the key, it always dodging away from them. Harry yelled, Ron, I'm goin' Terre go after I. Ye come up under I. Ron nodded and replied, gotcha, Harry. Goo. 1, 2, 3. Harry dove after the key, which flew quickly away. Ron flew below them then shot upwards but missed the key. Harry cursed then yelled, switch. Ron now dove after the key and Harry shot up from under it. He caught it in one hand, a nasty crunch accompanying it. The two of them landed and Harry shoved the key into the lock, twisting it. As the door swung open, he released it. The key flew off, looking much more battered than it already had. Jarden suddenly appeared again and landed on Harry's shoulder. He cast a disgruntled look at the Raven and snarled, "We could have used you back there." "Sorry, Harry." "Oh, it's all right, Jar. Where were you, by the way?" "Trying to get away from that plant. It obviously did not know I am a pyromancer." "You're a pyromancer." Jarden gave him that strange smile he did with his eyes. "One of my many talents." "You're amazing, Jar." "Yes, I know. Just don't get too full of yourself." "Me, full of myself? Never." Harry laughed inwardly at the Raven, then turned his attention back to what was going on. "Where are we now?" beeped Ron. Neve peered into the dark chamber they had walked into and replied, "I think it's a graveyard." "Wha? Into? Bloody heck would a graveyard be doing down there?" "Graveyard? It doesn't look like a graveyard." Neve scowled and snapped, "Shut up, Jarden." Jarden made an indignant sound and Hermione looked at him, then at Harry. "What's wrong with him?" "Neve just insulted." "I am. I did not. This. Ow. Sees I. Nee. Well, bully to him. I want to know where in the sod we are." "A chessboard." "Pardon," Ron said louder, "it's a chessboard." Light suddenly flooded the room and they could see that it was, indeed, a chessboard. "A giant chessboard." Began Neve. "We have to play our way across," said Ron. "Hermione, you take the place of the Queen's side castle. Harry, you take the Queen's bishop. Neve, dot the King's side castle." "What about you?" asked Hermione. "I'm going to be a knight." The aforementioned pieces moved back and they took their places. A white pawn moved forward onto the board and Neve suddenly asked, "Ron, is this going to be like wizard's chess?" Ron frowned, then ordered one of the black pawns forward. The white pawn cut it down and dragged it off the board ruthlessly. Ron gulped and said, "Yes, Neve, I think this is going to be exactly like wizard's chess." Neve swallowed. Hermione looked fearful, and Harry muttered, "I hope ye know what doin', Ron." A few seconds later, the game began. Neve shrieked and ducked as the White Queen took out the bishop that had been standing a few spaces to her left, spraying her with dust and shattered pieces. Harry yelled, "Hold on, Neve." Neve smiled weakly and looked up into the White Queen's face, shivering as she did so. Ron studied the board for a moment, then said, "I've got it." Harry blinked and looked at the pieces. Then it hit him. "Ron, no." "What?" yelled both Neve and Hermione. "Ease go and tear let himself be taken." "What?" shrieked Neve. Hermione yelled, "You can't." Ron bellowed back, "It's the only way. You want to stop Quirrell, don't you?" Harry nodded and said, "Alright. Just don't get yourself killed." Ron smiled weakly, then moved forward. The White Queen turned towards him and moved, bashing him over the head when she was close enough, then dragging him off the board. Hermione shrieked and would have moved forward if Jarden hadn't yelled at her. Harry looked at Ron lying crumpled at the edge of the board and moved towards the White King. He snapped, "Checkmate." The White King threw his crown down at Harry's feet and he ran for Ron, followed swiftly by Hermione and Neve. They all gathered around him, each looking worriedly at him. Harry finally said, "We, Avenue tear go on. Neve, ye stay, with, I am. Hermione and me'll go on." Harry, "No, stay, ye hear me, stay, Neve cowered, a part of her mind noting how much Harry's snapping voice resembled Snape's. She nodded and Harry turned to Hermione, tugging gently at her sleeve. The two of them quickly headed off, leaving Neve with Ron's unconscious form. Now well, the devil's snare had to be Sprout. Flitwick would have done the keys, McGonagall the chessboard, so that just leaves Quirrell and Snape. A sickle says Snape's eye, potions. Hermione frowned at him and Harry shrugged slightly, causing Jarden to give a disgruntled cry from his shoulder. "Sorry, Jar." "Quite all right." Harry shook his head, then pushed another door open, reeling back instantly. Hermione beeped, "What's that smell?" "Troll," replied Harry, remembering the smell from when he and Ron had rescued Neve from the troll that had been loosed in the school. The two of them crept forward, inching past the troll with their noses covered. A huge lump was on the troll's forehead, showing that they had no need to worry about it. Harry pushed open the door and slammed it shut as soon as Jarden flew through. He gave a little shake, then looked over at a table with 7 bottles, each of a different shape and size. "Snape," said Hermione, and Harry nodded. As they stepped into the room, a fire sprang up behind them and in front of them, the flames glowing purple and black. Hermione suddenly noticed a roll of paper lying on the table. She picked it up and they both read it as Jarden landed on the table, cocking his head at the bottles. "Danger lies before you, while safety lies behind. 2 of us will help you, whichever you would find. 1 among us 7 will let you move ahead. Another will transport the drinker back instead. 2 among our number hold only nettle wine. 3 of us are killers, waiting hidden in line. Choose, unless you wish to stay here forevermore. To help you in your choice, we give you these clues for. First, however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on nettle wine's left side. Second, different are those who stand at either end. But if you move onward, neither is your friend. Third, as you see clearly, all are different size. Neither dwarf nor giant holds death in their insides. Fourth, the second left and the second on the right are twins once you taste them, thought different at first sight." Harry groaned. "Logic. I ate logic puzzles. But they're so simple, Harry. I can get, I was, oppen you did. Lucky for you, I do." Harry breathed a sigh of relief and watched as Hermione peered at the bottles, looking down at the paper from time to time and pointing at some of them. "I've got it." Harry arched an eyebrow and Hermione continued with a grin. "The smallest bottle will get us through the black flames, and that rounded one there will get us back through the purple ones." Jarden bumped the smallest bottle gently with his beak and said to Harry, "There's only enough for 1 of you." "I see and see da. Jar," said Harry irritably. He then turned to Hermione and said, "Ye go back. Take Jar with ye and send, I am Tear Dumbledore. I'll go on ahead and, I am off as long as I see in. But if you know who's with him." Harry pointed at his scar. "I was lucky once, maybe I'll lucky again. Now get on ye." Hermione picked up the rounded bottle, then suddenly threw her arms around Harry, who jumped. "Hermione." Hermione pulled back and said, "Be careful, Harry. Go." With a nod, she downed the potion and shuddered. "It's like ice. On. 4 wears off. Harry, go. Hermione. Jar, go with her." "But," Harry fixed the raven with a fierce scowl. "No buts about it, you're going with her and that's that. Now go." Jarden flapped over to his shoulder and nipped his ear, then flew off after Hermione above the purple flames. Harry looked after them for a moment, then turned towards the black flames. He drained the little bottle and suppressed a shiver as a cold like ice moved through his body. Stepping through the flames, he looked down a flight of stairs into the chamber and saw the person he had expected to be there. "Hello, Professor Quirrell." Hermione ran back through the room with the troll and into the chamber with the giant chessboard. Neve had pulled Ron's head up into her lap and was staring off into the distance until Hermione came charging in. "Hermione, where's Harry? Going after the stone. Come on. We've got to go, Owl. I mean, Raven Dumbledore." "Raven. Oh, Jar." Jarden landed on Neve's shoulder and said to her, "Do not worry about Harry, child. He will be fine." Neve smiled slightly at the bird and replied, "I hope you're right." Then she turned to Hermione and said, "Let's go." Hermione nodded and cast a spell on Ron that made him float after them as they ran back through the other chambers to the key room, where they sent Jarden off with a hastily scribbled note on a scrap sheet of paper. As they waited there, watching Ron twitch slightly in unconsciousness, they prayed Harry would be all right. Quirrell turned from the large mirror standing in front of him to face Harry, who remembered the mirror. He had found it on one of his nightly outings in the castle while trying to escape from Filch before he had his invisibility cloak. Dumbledore had found him there once and told him about it, and that he should not go in search for it. "Mr. Potter, how did you know it was me?" Harry moved down a few steps and said, "Well, ye try and kill me, eh? The Quidditch match was a dead giveaway, wasn't I?" Quirrell smiled coldly and nodded. Yes, I suppose it was. And I would have succeeded if your little friend hadn't hit me with that curse. Even with Severus muttering his little counter-curse. Yay, I sawda, too. Some people though, he was tryin' ter kill me. Quirrell laughed and said, a pity you didn't, Potter. Harry shrugged. I'm nah most people. Yes, yes, how true. Severus made himself rather unpopular trying to keep me from you. And such a waste of time too. After all, I'm going to kill you tonight. Quirrell snapped his fingers and ropes sprang out of thin air to bind Harry. Nosy little Potter boy, sneaking around on Halloween, much like Severus. Ye let the troll in. Yes, ye nearly killed me fryin'. A pity. Harry scowled at Quirrell, who looked taken aback for a moment then turned to the mirror. He said, now, how does this mirror work? I see myself giving the stone to my master. The question is, how do I get it? Use the boy, said a low, hissing voice that seemed to be coming from Quirrell. Specifically, the back of his head. Harry narrowed his eyes at it and got a flash of pain through his scar for his trouble. Two things that had been troubling him suddenly snapped together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Come here, Potter. Quirrell snapped his fingers again and the ropes from Harry fell away. He walked slowly towards Quirrell, eyeing the other wizard warily. Moving in front of the mirror, he saw his reflection staring back at him, looking a tad fearful but also a bit arrogant. Suddenly his reflection dipped its hand into his pocket and pulled out a blood-red stone with jagged edges. A streak of white-hot shock shot through Harry but he didn't show it on his face, keeping his expression as it was before. His reflection winked at him then tucked the stone back into his pocket. Harry cast a glance downward and saw a slight bulge. He had the stone. Quirrell frowned and snapped, what do you see? Harry replied, me mummin', da. Quirrell's lip curled in rage and he threw Harry away from the mirror, looking into it himself. The snake-like voice from earlier hissed, he lies. Potter. Quirrell whirled upon him and bellowed, tell the truth. Let me speak to him. Master, you are not strong enough. I have strength enough for this. Quirrell suddenly began to unwind his turban, which Harry considered perfectly hideous. Harry crept backwards away from him, not liking the feeling he was getting. The last wind of the turban fell away and he saw a face, a ghastly face with chalk-white skin. A pair of glowing red eyes glared at him from above slits for nostrils, snake nostrils. Harry Potter, said the face. Harry rose to his feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in his scar, and said, Voldemort, in a calm, cool voice. Voldemort smiled. Yes, you see what I have become. A parasite who must live off another. Shadow and vapor since the last time we saw each other. All I need is the stone that just so happens to lie in your very pocket to give me back my body. Harry smirked and said, well, ye won't be getting, I. Voldemort laughed. Bravery. Your parents showed as such. Harry scowled. Don't be a fool, boy. Give me the stone, save your own life. Or, meet the same end as your parents. They begged me for mercy in the end, you know. Liar. Voldemort laughed, coldly, harshly. Silly, boy, you can't fight me. Certainly your father put up a fine fight but he died in the end. And your mother, why, she died to protect you. Surely you don't want her sacrifice to be in vain. So, just give me the stone. Harry snarled, in bloody dreams. Seize him. Quirrell spun and leapt at Harry just as he turned and ran for the door. Flames sprang up quickly and he staggered back, not because of them, but because Quirrell had grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip. Harry clenched his jaw as pain shot through his forehead from his scar and swung around, punching Quirrell with all his might. The wizard's head snapped to the right and he pulled away from Harry. Harry staggered on the steps, not knowing he had hit Quirrell that hard. Then he saw the man's fingers. They were bursting with bright red blisters before his eyes. Voldemort shrieked again, seize him. Seize him. Harry had no time to dodge as Quirrell lunged at him, tackling him to the floor. Pain from his scar blinded Harry for a moment then he felt Quirrell's hands on his throat, tightening. Choking, Harry threw his hands up and grabbed Quirrell's face, thanking God for giving him such long arms. Quirrell screamed in agony and Harry felt the skin blistering and peeling away under his fingertips. Voldemort's yells made up the background noise along with the flames, but Harry could only hear Quirrell's screams and his own choking. Through his pain, the man was still choking him. Suddenly Quirrell was thrown away from him and he heard a voice cry, Avada Kedavra, and saw a flash of familiar green light before the blackness that had been closing in on his vision took him in its embrace and he gladly fell into it. I think he's waking up. Harry opened his eyes and had to blink several times in order to see clearly. A whirlwind of black hair and blue eyes suddenly threw itself upon him, crying, "Oh, God, Harry. I thought you were never going to wake up." Harry smiled weakly at Neve and mumbled, "Sorry tear sorry ye, nee." Neve's eyes suddenly narrowed and she snapped, "You had better be." Then she turned back into the cheerful girl he knew and cried, "I'm just so happy you're back. How long was I owe you?" 3 days. Nearly everybody sent you something. Everyone knows what happened down there. Harry looked to the foot of the bed and saw a pile of candies sitting on a trolley. Goo, bleedin' gods, they send the whole candy shop. Neve grinned slyly and said, "Fred and George tried to send you a toilet seat." Harry looked at her then burst out laughing. Neve continued grinning then joined him in laughing. "Good afternoon, Harry, Miss O'Fair." "Professor," cried both students and looked up into Dumbledore's twinkling blue eyes. He held up a hand and smiled behind his long white beard. "By no means stop because of me. Laughter is a wonderful thing, you know." The twinkle in his eyes brightened as he continued, "Miss O'Fair, if you may leave for a moment. I wish to talk to Mr. Potter." Neve nodded and hopped down from where she had been sitting on the edge of Harry's bed. She squeezed his hand and mouthed, "I'll be back," before turning and dashing out. Dumbledore smiled after her and said, "Such an energetic child, isn't she?" Harry nodded then asked, "Wha' happened, Professor? Down in the chamber, does Quirrell Avenue the stone?" Dumbledore smiled and waved a withered hand. "No, dear boy, he does not. My old friend Nicholas and I had a little chat and we thought it was best if it was destroyed. And so it has. Destroyed. But Mr. Flammel has enough elixir to put his affairs in order then, yes, he will die. But, as he quoted to me, death is but the next great adventure." Harry frowned then forced a smile. "I suppose." Dumbledore chuckled then said, "You did a very brave thing down there, Harry. Unfortunately, it almost killed you in the process." "Yea, sir. Who got me away from Quirrell? Somebody was down dear and through. I am off o' me." Dumbledore smiled. "I arrived just in time. So, Jardin found ye." A spark of surprise flickered in Dumbledore's eyes then he said, "We must have crossed in midair. As soon as I got to the ministry, I knew I was needed here. I returned as quick as I could. It was almost not quick enough." Harry nodded, storing the flicker of surprise back in his mind for later looking over. "And, Ron, fine, perfectly fine, as well as Miss Granger and Miss O'Fair, whom you have seen." Harry nodded again, thinking. Then he said, "Sir, wha' about Voldemort?" "Ah, I was wondering when you would ask that. Is he gone?" Dumbledore sighed. "I am afraid not, Harry. He is still out there somewhere, being not really alive, he can't be killed. He left Quirrell to die, which shows you just how ruthless he is, willing to give up those who follow him without a thought. But, you have delayed his return to power and as there are others who succeed in doing that then he may never return to power." Harry nodded again. "And, why couldn't Quirrell touch me?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled as he said, "I believe you already know the answer to that, Harry." Harry smiled. He did. He knew it had something to do with his mother dying for him. Somewhere in a book he had read about that. Or heard it. That love left its own mark on a person, giving them a protection of their own, leaving no scar behind. Only protection, embedded in one's own skin. It had hurt Quirrell horribly to touch him with that protection on him from his mother. After all, Quirrell had been sharing his soul with Voldemort. Harry nodded then asked, "Wha' about the invisibility cloak?" "Ah, your father left that in my possession. I thought you might like it. It is such a useful item, is it not?" Harry nodded then asked the question that had been bothering him for a while. "Sir." "Yes, Harry, why d Voldemort won. Tear kill me in the first place. Dumbledore sighed and said, "Ah, the one question I cannot answer at this time." When Harry looked like he was about to protest, Dumbledore continued. "One day, you will know. But not now. The truth should be treated with caution as it is a beautiful, and a terrible, thing. Do you understand?" "Yes, Professor." "Good." Dumbledore rose to leave and was at the door when Harry asked, "How did I get the stone out o' the mirror?" "Ah, one of my more brilliant ideas. You see, only someone who wanted the stone but did not want to use it, could get it. A very brilliant idea if I must say so myself." Harry smiled and said, "Thank ye, Professor." "No trouble, Harry. No trouble at all. Now, get some rest or I fear Poppy shall be hounding you." Harry laughed as the old wizard left the hospital wing, then leaned back onto his pillows. As he did he thought, now, how on earth did Dumbledore know we'd gone after the stone if Jarden didn't get to him? "Another year, gone," said Dumbledore said a few days later at the end of year feast. Harry and Neve were sitting together at the Slytherin table, Jarden perched on Harry's shoulder. The hall was decked out in Slytherin colors, which had all of the Slytherins grinning and Snape looking rather proudly at them. "And what a year. Perhaps your heads are a little fuller than they were, even if you do get them nice and empty this summer. Now, as I understand it, the House Cup needs awarding and the points stand as thus. In fourth place, Gryffindor, with 312 points. In third, Hufflepuff, with 352 points. Ravenclaw has 426 points and Slytherin, 472. Draco banged his goblet loudly on the table in the wave of cheering that broke from the Slytherin table. Harry and Neve simply smiled. "But, there are a few last-minute points I have to award." The hall fell silent quickly as soon as this was said. Firstly, to Mr. Ronald Weasley, 50 points for the best played game of chess Hogwarts as seen in many years. Harry saw Ron turn a shade of brilliant crimson and gave his friend a wide grin as he heard Percy yelled, "My brother got past McGonagall's giant chess set." Second, to Miss Hermione Granger, 50 points for cool logic in the face of fire. Hermione buried her face in her arms as the Gryffindors whooped loudly. Neve and Harry looked at each other, each suspecting she had burst into tears. Third, to Miss Neve O'Fair, 50 points for braving great peril to stand by her friends. Neve flushed and Harry grinned at her, Jarden flapping his wings in applause. And fourth, to Mr. Harry Potter, for pure nerve and outstanding courage, I award Slytherin House 60 points. Cheers exploded from Slytherin as they realized they still had the cup and had won by an amazing 582 points. Harry looked up at the head table and saw a rather angry-looking McGonagall shaking a smug Snape's hand. On his shoulder Jarden cawed and said, "Well done. Well done." Harry beamed and hugged Neve, who returned it and key *****ed him on the cheek as well, which caused him to flush pink. He then laughed and said to Jarden, "Perhaps being in Slytherin isn't so bad after all. Alright. Le's go. On the train with ye." Harry and Neve dragged their trunks onto the train, waving at Hagrid before getting on, and settled into the first empty cabin they found. Ron and Hermione joined them a few moments later, smiling weakly at their friends. Neve said, "Oh, come on, Ron. Don't tell me you're still angry about Slytherin winning the cup." Ron frowned and Harry smiled at his friend as he stroked Jarden's inky feathers. "Yale Avenue next year, Ron, don't worry." Ron smiled weakly and nodded. They passed the trip back to King's Cross playing Exploding Snap and Wizard's Chess. They changed out of their Hogwarts robes into Muggle clothes as the green fields changed into occupied pastures and scattered houses, putting things back into trunks and getting ready to get off. When they finally did, Neve asked, "Harry, where are you going for the summer?" "Not back to Argyll." Harry looked at her in surprise and shook his head. "Nah, Professor Dumbledore contacted me aunt and uncle. Apparently, I was supposed to be them all these years." Hermione asked, "Why weren't you?" Harry shrugged. "Who knows?" He then looked at the three of them and asked, "Ye'll right tear me over the summer, right?" Neve and Hermione flung their arms around him at the same time while Ron grinned at him. "Of course," said Hermione. "Why wouldn't we, mate? asked Neve with a grin. We'll be riding you non-stop, said Ron. Harry grinned and said, "Tonks." No problem, Harry, said his three friends, and they walked through the barrier back into the real world. Hermione waved goodbye as she left with her parents, bouncing up and down so she could see Harry and Neve. Ron had already gone before, Mrs. Weasley lingering long enough to hug his three friends and ask Harry if he wanted to come home with them. As much as Harry wanted to revisit the Burrow, the first wizarding home he had been in since perhaps his parents', he was returning to his aunt and uncle's. A stern-faced man came and dragged Neve away, sneering at Harry as he went. Neve twisted and waved back at him, her face twisted into a grimace. Harry waved feebly in return, then felt a large hand fall on his shoulder. Looking up, he was a rather portly man with blonde hair standing there. Harry blinked. Uncle Vernon. Vernon nodded and said, "Come along, boy. I'll take your trunk." And so he did. They walked out to his car and Vernon shoved the trunk into the boot, motioning Harry into the passenger seat. Harry climbed in, then waited, reaching back into the backseat to stroke Jordan's feathers through his cage. He hated caging the raven because he felt more like a friend than a pet, but it was necessary. Vernon climbed into the car and then they were off. They didn't talk on the way, not even Jordan and Harry talked. When they arrived, Harry got out and retrieved Jordan's cage while Vernon pulled his trunk out of the boot. They walked up to the house and Vernon opened the door. As they entered, a bony, horse-faced woman walked out of the kitchen and leveled a wooden spoon at Harry. "You, back again, are you?" Harry arched an eyebrow in surprise. "Again?" The woman curled a lip at him, taking in Jordan's cage in his hand and his long hair. She then snapped, "You'll be sleeping in there." Harry looked where she was pointing and saw a broom cupboard. He felt outraged. They were making him sleep in a broom cupboard. "And I want to hear nothing about that freak school of yours." "Nothing." Harry nodded and said, "Yay, Aunt Petunia." Petunia curled her lip at his accent, then stormed off into the kitchen. Vernon looked worriedly at him, then dragged his trunk away upstairs. Harry looked after him, then at the broom cupboard. Sighing, he silently vowed not to let his horrid aunt, terrified uncle, and still unseen cousin push him around. Looking down at Jordan, he said, "Well, looks like we're home, Jar." Harry groaned and shifted on his cot in the cupboard under the stairs. It was just 3 weeks after he had arrived at the Dursleys, fresh out of his first year at Hogwarts. He had found 3 friends, a fourth in his Raven who could talk and was over 100 years old, and defeated the most feared dark wizard since Grindelwald for the second time in his life. And yet, here he was, stuck in a broom cupboard with a rickety cot and a thin blanket with only the spiders and a disgruntled Jordan for company. "Get up, you mangy little brat." Okay. Now he was awake. And angry. Harry threw the blanket aside and shoved the door of the cupboard open, ducking his head as he stormed out, moving past his Aunt Petunia into the kitchen. His uncle and whale of a cousin were already there, sitting at the table. Dudley stuck his tongue out at him and Harry scowled in return, earning a box on the ear for it. Petunia snapped in her fingernails on chalkboard voice, "Cook the bacon, boy. And don't burn it." Harry, still scowling, complied. Aunt Petunia had told him already that if he wanted to return to that freak school of his, he'd have to work for it. Or he wouldn't be going back. Harry snorted at the thought. It would be simple enough to break his way out of the cupboard and run with Jordan. He had smartly kept his wand with him when he had put all his other things in his trunk, even if they had been told not to use magic over the holidays. Certainly if he ran he wouldn't have his trunk, but he could get other books with the money in his Gringotts vault. He had also smartly kept his father's invisibility cloak with him. It, his wand, and Jordan were his most prized possessions, not that he actually considered Jordan a possession, more like a friend. Speaking of which, breakfast. Harry wasn't the least bit startled when Jordan's voice had echoed through his head. If he had, he'd be sporting severe burns on his hands. He had gotten used to the Raven's voice since he had gotten him Christmas morning. "Jar, what in the bloody heck are you doing? Catching breakfast? There are some delectable-looking spiders in here." Harry grimaced. Jar, yes, that's gross. Correction. Gulp, that's breakfast. Harry rolled his eyes and laughed mentally at the raven before taking the bacon out of the pan and putting it onto plates. He carried them to the table and handed one to his aunt, uncle, and cousin, then sat down with his own. Under his aunt's piercing gaze he finished it quickly, then went back to the cupboard, giving the rinds and a piece of toast to Jardin. "Ah, bacon rinds and a slice of toast. Such a wonderful breakfast you had." "Shut up, Jar," snapped Harry, then turned to take the list of chores from his aunt. She looked down her nose at him in a way that reminded him rather of Malfoy and snapped, "I want those down by this afternoon. No exceptions." Harry nodded and set to work. "Gods." Jardin hopped from his perch on one of the narrow shelves in the cupboard to Harry's back. Harry had come in just a moment before, beeped, and collapsed face down on the cot. "Something wrong?" "Yeah, all the sodding work I have to do. Have you seen my cousin? My aunt should get him to do some of the work. And your uncle, he's actually not that bad. Terrified of Aunt Petunia though. I think she's a relation to Malfoy." Jardin laughed in both their heads and said, "Perhaps. She has the face for it." Harry lifted his head and looked over his shoulder to grin at the raven standing on his back. "Good poem." "Shut up." Jardin jumped and gave a startled squawk. "And keep that bird quiet." Harry was half tempted to tell Jardin to squawk again but didn't dare risk it. He had the feeling his aunt could get rather testy and he was not in the mood, nor would he ever be, to be beaten again. Argyle had been enough. Thinking of Argyle started him thinking of Tiles and he wondered where his friend was now. "Harry, go to sleep, Jar." "Ah, but there is a very large spider crawling on your leg." Harry looked down and flicked it off. It hit the wall with a soft splat and fell to the floor. Jardin flapped down after it and as Harry turned over onto his back, he heard the sound of the raven gulping something down. "Thank you. Welcome. Now go to sleep." Jardin hopped back up to nestle down on the pillow beside Harry's head as the boy pulled the ragged blanket over himself and fell asleep. As July 31st rolled around, Harry began to wonder if his friends had forgotten about his birthday. He thought he remembered telling them about it but couldn't remember for certain. And shouldn't they have sent him a letter by now? Maybe he could sneak Jardin out tonight and send something to Neve. Quirking a smile at the thought, Harry brushed the sweat off his brow and went back to weeding the garden. It was blazing hot outside and he had taken off his shirt, revealing his scars, which showed white against his pale skin. He was sure he saw the old woman who lived across the street wince when she had walked by earlier. Shrugging, he dug the trowel deeply into the dirt. And a voice sprang out at him. "Stupid human." Harry jumped and watched as a small black snake with sparkling black eyes slithered out from behind the plant he had been trying to dig up. He peered at it and said, "Was it you?" The snake blinked and looked up at him. "You can understand me." Harry jumped again and fell back onto the ground, staring at the snake. He sputtered, "I was you." "Of course it was," said the snake irritably, reminding Harry of his head of house, Professor Snape. "But I have never heard a human speak back to me." Harry snorted and said, "Well, I haven't talked to a snake before." Strange. What were you doing?" "Weedin'. Me aunt makes me." "Why?" asked the snake. Harry shrugged. "I don't know. Jardin thinks she's a relation to Malfoy." "Who is Jardin?" "And Malfoy." "Jardin is me Raven. He see and talk as well. And Malfoy is a bloody bastard who goes to me school." "I see," said the snake. "Could I perhaps stay on you while you weed and talk? I have not talked in anyone in so long." Harry nodded and said, "Sure." He let the snake wrap around his wrist then continued weeding, talking to it all the while until Aunt Petunia stormed out of the house and shrieked, "Boy, get inside." She then spotted the snake and started towards him, rage flashing across her face. Harry staggered for a moment in surprise but stood his ground, eyes flashing. Aunt Petunia pointed at the snake and hissed, "And get rid of that thing, you little freak." She slapped him hard then turned and went back into the house. Harry rubbed his cheek, feeling the bone underneath ache. As summer had progressed he had grown a few inches and his cheekbones had become more pronounced, making him look like a corpse, Aunt Petunia said. Looking down at the black snake he asked, "Did ye hear her?" "Yes, I did. She is not a nice woman. She killed many of my kind." "I'm sorry." It was not your fault. I shall go now. Harry placed the snake back on the ground and asked, will I see ye again? The snake looked up at him and replied, I do not know. Perhaps we shall meet again. Until then. With that it had vanished into the grass. Heaving a sigh, Harry shrugged back into his shirt, then put the tools back into the shed before heading inside to find out what Aunt Petunia wanted. When he was eating lunch, Uncle Vernon suddenly said, Mr. and Mrs. Mason are coming over tonight for dinner. If everything goes well, this could be the biggest deal of my career. Aunt Petunia smiled and said, that's wonderful, dear. She then turned to Harry and snarled, and you, of course, know where you'll be. Harry nodded and glumly replied, in me cupboard na makin' a sound. And if you do anything to ruin this, you know what will happen. Harry nodded again, knowing full well she was talking about his going back to Hogwarts or not, then sent a furious scowl at Dudley for laughing at his accent. He then dumped his plate in the sink and went to finish his chores. Just before the Masons arrived, Aunt Petunia shoved Harry towards the cupboard and hissed, remember what I said, boy. One sound out of you or that bird and you won't be going back to that freak school of yours. Yay, Aunt Petunia, she sneered at him then left. Harry sighed and headed for the cupboard. As soon as he reached the door, Jordan's voice blasted into his mind. Harry. Harry winced and snarled, I'm right here, Jar. What in the sod did you yell for? We've got trouble. What? Snapped Harry irritably, hearing Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia greeting Mr. and Mrs. Mason in the next room. It's a house elf. A what? A house elf, replied Jordan. A rather bouncy house elf. Is that bad thing? In a house full of muggles? Yes. Harry cursed under his breath then said, what does he want? I would not know as I can't speak to house elves. Oh, bloody hell, hissed Harry under his breath then shot into the cupboard as Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon began to lead Mr. and Mrs. Mason towards the dining room. He closed the door as quietly as he could then turned to see a little creature with large, bat-like ears and tennis ball-sized green eyes. It was wearing what looked like an old pillowcase. Hello, said Harry uncertainly, glancing at Jordan. The raven looked back at him from his perch and shrugged. The creature said in a high voice, Harry Potter. Dobby has waited long to see you. Harry heard the voices from the dining room falter and whispered, thank ye, but who are you? Dobby, sir. Dobby the house elf. Okay. Avenue tear tell ye, this is na a good time fair me tear have a house elf in my, cupboard, suggested Jordan. Shut it, you, spat Harry, annoyed. My bedroom, I guess. Bedroom. Ha. Jar, growled Harry warningly, giving the raven the evil eye. Harry turned back to Dobby and asked, is there any reason why Yes, sir, cried Dobby. Dobby came to tell you something, sir, very important, sir. The beginning, suggested Harry, listening to the voices drifting out of the kitchen. Dobby has come to warn Harry Potter. Warn me aboo, wah. The house elf bounced up and down, his eyes shifting back and forth. Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts. Harry looked taken aback. But, Avenue tear go back. This my world, I don't belong, I canna stay, Dobby shook his head wildly and squeaked, if Harry Potter goes back to Hogwarts, he will be in mortal danger. Jordan snorted mentally and said, when is that not so? Harry glared at the raven then asked, wah, danger. A plot, Harry Potter. A plot to make very bad things happen. Harry Potter must not go back. You is too important, sir. Terrible things, said Harry, arching an eyebrow. Who's planning them? Dobby's eyes went wide and he made a choking sound before beginning to bash his head against the floor. Harry jerked him off it and looked at Jordan. What in the bloody hell was that about? House elves are bound to wizarding families. If they say something bad against their family, they must punish themselves. Bound, like me and you. There was a pause then Jordan said, something of the sort. Something of the sort, he says, grumbled Harry then let go of Dobby, who was hiccuping. Shish, he whispered, straining his ears to hear for voices in the dining room. They had faltered at the sound of Dobby bashing his head against the floor then slowly rose again. He sighed with relief, then turned back to Dobby. Okay. Ye canna tell me, I get da. But does I, Avenue tear do with Voldemort? Dobby clapped his hands over his ears and beeped, do not say the name, sir. Okay. Okay. Harry waved his hands frantically and took a deep breath. Okay. Does I, Avenue anything tear do with you know who? Dobby shook his head and said, not he who must not be named, sir. No, no, no. Harry frowned then said, but who else Sue, make somethin' horrible happen at Hogwarts. Dobby bounced on his feet some more, eyes wide as though he were trying to give Harry a hint. Nothin' seein' happen at Hogwarts, Dobby. Dumbledore's there. Albus Dumbledore is a great headmaster. Yes, sir, but there are things no decent wizard. He suddenly began to pound his head on the floor again, at the same time shrieking, bad Dobby. Bad. Harry grabbed a sock and shoved it into his mouth to stop the sound. He heard the voices from the dining room falter then pick up again. Sighing with relief, he removed the sock from Dobby's mouth. Okay, so, something's goin' tear happen. But I still canna stay, Dobby. Think of my friends. Friends who do not send you letters. Harry blinked then scowled down at the house elf. He snarled, how do ye know me friends, haven't been writing tear me. Dobby reached into his pillowcase and pulled out a wad of envelopes, shaking all the while under Harry's furious scowl. Harry Potter mustn't be angry at Dobby. Ye've been stoppin' me letters, growled Harry in a low voice dripping with anger as he recognized Hermione's neat writing, Ron's untidy scrawl, and Neve's spidery hand among the letters. Harry Potter must forgive Dobby, he thought. He thought if Harry Potter thought his friends had forgotten him he would not want to go back to school. Harry was becoming angrier by the minute. Jardin cautioned in his head, easy, Harry, easy. But Harry wasn't listening. He made a lunge at Dobby, who jumped nimbly away, clutching the letters to his chest. Harry Potter will have them if he promises not to go back to Hogwarts. Harry snapped, I already told ye, I canna stay, Dobby looked sadly at him and said, then Dobby is sorry, sir. The house elf dashed out of the cupboard. Harry cursed and followed him, Jardin flapping after him. He darted into the kitchen and saw Dobby crouched on a shelf. Aunt Petunia's pudding was floating in midair. Harry looked up at it then at Dobby as Jardin came to land on his shoulder. Dobby, please. Harry Potter must promise. I canna. I am sorry, Harry Potter, said Dobby mournfully and disappeared with a loud crack. The pudding crashed to the floor, sending glass and cream splattering everywhere. Harry sputtered and spit some out of his mouth. On his shoulder, Jardin made an indignant sound. Suddenly Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon charged into the kitchen. Aunt Petunia saw the mess and glared at him. Striding forward, she grabbed him by the collar and hissed, clean this up, boy. And you won't be going back to that freak school of yours anymore. She threw the mop at him then dragged Uncle Vernon back into the dining room. As Harry started scrubbing the kitchen clean, a huge barn owl suddenly swept into the kitchen through the dining room, earning a shriek and a run from Mrs. Mason. He clearly heard Mr. Mason saying something about his wife being afraid of birds, then the slam of the door. A moment later Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen again. Aunt Petunia pointed at the barn owl and the letter tied to its leg. She hissed, read it. Harry cast a look at Jardin, who was standing on the counter cleaning his feathers, then walked over to the owl. As soon as he untied the letter from its leg, it flew off. He opened it and read it out loud. Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening at 9:12. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to perform spells outside school, and further spellwork on your part may lead to expulsion from said school. Decree of Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery, 1875, paragraph C. We would also ask you to remember that any magical activity that risks notice by members of the non-magical community, Muggles, is a serious offense under Section 13 of the International Confederation of Warlocks, Statute of Secrecy. Enjoy your holidays. Yours sincerely, Mafalda Hopkirk. Improper use of magic office. Ministry of Magic. Harry swallowed hard and Jardin said, a deep puddle we are in now, my friend. Aunt Petunia gave him a feral grin and said, forgot to tell us you can't do magic out of school, didn't you? Must have slipped your mind. Well, you won't be going anywhere anymore, boy. Petunia, perhaps, began Uncle Vernon. Shut up, Vernon. Uncle Vernon closed his mouth and gave Harry a rather sad, pitying look. Aunt Petunia snarled, finish cleaning up the kitchen then back into your cupboard, boy. As she started to leave the room she yelled, and get rid of that bloody raven. I don't want to see it in my house again. She stormed out of the room, followed a moment later by Uncle Vernon. Harry sighed then turned to look at Jarden, who was preening on of his wings. Jar, I heard, Harry, go to Ron's. Tell him to come get me the hell out of here. I don't care what it takes. I want out. Jarden bobbed his head in a nod and said, I will. Good luck. Go, said Harry, ducking his head. He heard Jarden fly out the open window in the dining room then silence. Sighing, he set back to cleaning. Ron, I'm worried about Harry. Ron looked up from his chess game with Ginny to look at Neve. She was visiting her aunt in Ottery Street, Catchpole for a week while her parents were on a trip to America and had told her aunt she, just so happened, to remember one of her school friends lived there. So, Neve had trudged up to the borough on her first day there and had been coming ever since. Today was Wednesday and she was sitting on the Weasleys' couch reading the now slightly battered book of hexes and curses she and Harry passed between each other. Why, I don't know. Because he hasn't written anything to either of us, replied Neve irritably. Ginny frowned and said, maybe he forgot. Neve shook her head. You've met Harry, Ginny. He stayed here for, what? A month. Something like that, muttered Ron as he peered down at the chessboard. Okay. So, Gin, you know he doesn't forget things. Forgets to do his homework. Ron, you forget to do your homework. Harry waits till the last minute and does it in class. Oh, right. So, what do you want to do? Go to, what was it again? His aunt and uncle's house, sighed Neve. Yeah, his aunt and uncle's house and check on him. Actually I would like. She was interrupted when a large black bird shot into the living room from the kitchen, followed by an angry-looking Mrs. Weasley. Would someone care to explain what that is? Neve looked at the bird, which had perched on the mantelpiece and gasped, Jarden. Ron's head came up, he was too engrossed in the chess game to notice the bird's entrance, and he whirled to look at the raven. Jarden. The one and only. Now, could you please tell her not to hit me with that rather large frying pan? Neve jumped up and said, that's Harry's bird, Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley frowned and asked, why does Harry have a raven? I thought he bought that lovely snowy owl. What did he call it? Hedwig, said Neve softly. Draco Malfoy killed her and Harry got Jarden for Christmas. From who? Apparently someone who hadn't lived what Malfoy did. Mrs. Weasley shook her head and said, Malfoys. Always Malfoys. With that she went back into the kitchen and Neve turned back to Jarden. Okay. What's going on? You're here, you have no letter, and I am seriously pissed off now from remembering what Malfoy did to Hedwig. Jarden made a sound in his throat then said, Harry is in trouble. His aunt, who I believe may be a relation to Malfoy, Ron made a hacking sound here, told him he could not return to Hogwarts. What? Screamed both Neve and Ron. I haven't finished. A house elf came into Harry's CU bedroom and told him that he couldn't return to Hogwarts. Something bad's going to happen this year, kids. Neve scowled at him then turned to Ron. What's a house elf? They're elves. Mummed like one. They clean and all sorts of things. Of course, they only come with big castles and old mansions. Neve frowned then jerked as Jarden suddenly spoke once more. Oh, and Harry said to get him the hell out of there. Anything else? Do it any way you can. Neve smiled. That should be fun. Fun. What are we going to do? Neve grinned at Ron and said, find your brothers. Percy. What will he do? Not all your brothers. Fred and George. We need their expertise. Neve. Yes, Ron. What are we doing? Rescuing Harry, replied Neve in a savage voice. Get in there and stay in there. Harry was flung into his cupboard by his aunt, landing hard on the floor. He heard the lock snap closed and slowly sat up, wincing. His aunt had officially given him his first beating. He lifted his shirt and peered at the bruise purpling on his side. Oh, that was going to be a beauty. Putting his shirt back down, he climbed into his cot, wincing again as he hit one of the old scars. Aunt Petunia had opened a few of the more recent ones from Argyll's last beating a year ago. Sighing, he buried his face in the pillow, almost wishing he were back with Argyll. The man may have beaten him, but he hadn't hated him. What seemed only a few minutes later, he heard the sound of someone sliding open the lock. Sitting up, he pulled his wand from the holster he had bought when he was with the Weasleys at Diagon Alley last year. He kept it hidden under his baggy T-shirts at his aunt and uncle's. It was also the reason he was so fast at pulling his wand out. Suddenly the door opened and he was looking into two familiar freckled faces. "Fred, George," he whispered excitedly, "what in the sod are ye two doin', air?" "Rescuing you," replied George. "Or was that Fred?" "Rescue." The twins nodded. "So jar made I." "Yep, interesting bird, that one." "Yeah, seems it can talk." Harry nodded then said, "We'd better ge out air. If me aunt and uncle wake up, I'm dead." "Let's go then. We've got your trunk in the car." "Car," said Harry incredulously as he dug through different things and grabbed his invisibility cloak. He left everything else, even the clothes. His aunt had given him Dudley's old things, one of which he was wearing. "Let's go," said Fred, or was that George? They headed upstairs and into the smallest bedroom, which was stuffed full of Dudley's old toys. Outside the window Harry could see an old turquoise car floating in midair. Ron and Neve were perched in the backseat, along with Jarden, who was sitting on Neve's shoulder. Harry quickly shushed his friend. They catch me getting, and I'm dead." Neve's eyes widened and he thought he heard her mutter, "And I thought my parents were bad." Fred climbed through the window into the front seat of the car and George followed him. Just as Harry was starting to climb through, there was a shriek from downstairs and then his aunt appeared in the doorway. He leapt for the car as she lunged at him. "Go, go, go," he bellowed at Fred as he dived through the back window of the car. Fred punched the gas and they shot away from No. 4 Privet Drive. Harry straightened in the backseat then said, "Tonks." He then hung partially out the window and saw his aunt staring up after them. Waving cheerfully to her, he then sat back down. And was buried under Neve. "Harry, you're okay," Harry yelped as he hugged him, hitting out of his bruises. Neve pulled back and looked at him worriedly. "What was that?" Harry sighed and lifted his shirt for her to see. Neve gave a gasp of horror while Ron looked on in shock. They had known about him getting beaten by Argyll but had never seen his scars, which were now overcast by Aunt Petunia's bruises. George turned to look at what they were doing and froze. "Harry, mate, what happened?" Harry dropped his shirt and replied, "Aunt Petunia happened. I think she's related to Malfoy." "Oh no," beeped Ron and Neve. "So could you, Harry. Your face is rather." Ron's voice drifted off as Harry scowled at him. In the front seat George looked at Fred, who turned slightly to look before turning back around to drive. He said quietly to George, "He looks even more like Professor Snape than before." "You don't think?" "I don't know what to think." George nodded and leaned back in his seat, listening as Harry told Ron and Neve about his month with the Dursleys. "Harry, dear, what happened to you?" Mrs. Weasley had begun to fuss over Harry as soon as he got back to the burrow. She had firmly scolded her sons and Neve then turned perfectly cheerful towards him. "'Sall right, Mrs. Weasley. I've 'ad worse." They were sitting in the kitchen and Mrs. Weasley was putting something on his bruises and reopened cuts. Neve entered the kitchen and blanched at the sight her friend Harry had taken off his shirt. She moved to sit down in the chair in front of him, her eyes going to each scar that marred his thin arms and chest. Harry looked at her and said, "Essenada, bad, nee." "Not that bad, Harry, look at you. You've got more scars than anyone rightly should have." Harry shrugged. "Harry, dear, don't move," and said, "I've been through worse than anyone should, haven't you? I lived on the streets, 'member?" "I remember." Suddenly Ginny ran into the kitchen, brown eyes widening when she saw Harry. Her eyes went to each scar as Neve's had, then she met his eyes. "Harry. Ello, Gin. Ow. Avenue ye been. Good, good. You." Harry shrugged again. Harry, dear, stop moving. And said, I'd better. Mrs. Weasley finished and said, there. Those should be healed up in a few days. I can't get rid of the scars though. S'alright, Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley nodded, looking at him rather sadly. He smiled at her, then turned back to Ginny and Neve, both of whom were also looking rather sadly at him. Harry said, I'm fine. Don't worry. Oh, Harry, cried Ginny and flung her arms around him. Harry winced as she hit one of his bruises but didn't say anything, simply hugged her in return. Tonks, Gin. Ginny blushed and mumbled, welcome. Harry grinned, then looked out towards the garden, where Fred, George, and Ron were. Turning back to the two girls, he said, come on. Le's go see how those three are doin'. He grabbed his shirt and they headed forward. Duck. Harry ducked as George let a gnome fly over his head. It landed over the hedge and got back up, waving its fist at George. Ginny and Neve applauded from their spot near the door. Suddenly a gnome appeared near Harry's feet and he snatched it, swinging into around twice before letting it go. Whoa, that must have been 50 feet, Harry. Harry beamed at Fred, then at Ginny and Neve, who were going into raucous bits of applause. The boys kept throwing gnomes, Ginny and Neve applauding in different degrees for each of them. Harry seemed to get the most applause. As they were going inside, Fred flung an arm about Harry's bare shoulders. He still hadn't put his shirt back on as it was hot outside, and said softly, I think Ginny and Neve are crushing you. Harry blinked, then realized what he was saying. Wah, nah. Yeah, why do you think they gave you the most applause? Nee, 'cause she's me fryin'. Gin. Can't think of a reason for that one, can you? Shut up. Hey. Harry scowled at him and disengaged himself from the older boy. As he walked into the burrow, he looked back at Neve and Ginny. The two of them had found one last gnome and Neve was spinning it. She let it go and it sailed in a high arch before landing directly on top of one of the other gnomes. Neve screamed, just where I wanted it to land, and began to jump up and down, hugging Ginny, who was laughing. Ron was staring at them in awe. Harry looked from one to the other, then began to laugh at them. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.